Welcome, friend, to another journey together. We're so glad to have you here. Tonight, we embark on a powerful journey designed to help you stop the endless stream of thoughts that often disrupt deep rest. If you'd like, feel free to share what time it is and where you are listening from. Through the timeless wisdom contained in Buddhist tales and Zen teachings, you'll uncover pathways to profound understanding and clarity for deep calm and peace. I will guide you through a carefully chosen selection of these ancient stories, each designed to reveal the hidden mechanisms of the mind and unlock the secrets to mental stillness and emotional liberation. Each tale offers a transformative teaching capable of shifting your relationship with stress, unease, persistent thinking, and the relentless pursuit of more. These aren't just stories. They are carefully preserved teachings from masters who understood something most of us have forgotten: that true tranquility isn't found in altering our circumstances, but in transforming how we relate to them. As the ancient Zen proverb teaches, when the mind is empty, there is peace. Over the course of our journey, you'll discover exactly how these ancient truths can guide you to profound stillness. As we journey through these remarkable tales, you'll notice something powerful begin to happen. The tight grip of worry will begin to loosen. The constant chatter of your thoughts will start to quiet. You'll find yourself naturally settling into a state of deep understanding and restful calm. So settle in deeply now. Let your body sink into whatever supports you. Take one conscious breath with me, and as you exhale, know that you're about to receive teachings that have been awaiting your discovery for a very long time. Let us begin with a story about the illusion of spiritual seeking. This is the end of the road. A monk had traveled for many years, crossing treacherous mountain passes and swift rivers to seek the wisdom of a great Zen master who lived in a remote monastery. The journey was long and arduous, filled with hardships that tested his resolve at every turn. His feet were blistered, his robes were worn thin, and his body ached from the constant travel. Yet through it all, he carried within his heart a burning desire for enlightenment and the certainty that this legendary master held the key to his spiritual fulfillment. When he finally arrived at the monastery gates, the monk was filled with a profound sense of accomplishment. He had overcome every obstacle, endured every hardship, and now stood at the threshold of what he believed would be his ultimate spiritual destination. His heart raced with anticipation as he entered the master's simple quarters. The master sat quietly mending a worn robe, his movements deliberate and unhurried. The monk approached with a deep reverence, bowed low, and spoke with the gravity of one who had completed an epic quest. "Master," he said, his voice trembling with emotion, "after a long and difficult journey, I have finally reached the end of my road. I have come to you for the final teaching." The master looked up from his mending, studying the weary traveler with eyes that seemed to see beyond the surface. After a long moment of silence, he asked a simple question that would shatter everything the monk thought he knew. "From where do you see a road?" The monk was speechless. In that single instant, his entire conception of a spiritual path, a journey with beginning and end, and a destination to be reached dissolved completely. He realized that his struggle, his effort, and the very road he was so proud of conquering were all constructions of his own mind. There was no road to be on, only the being here and now. The Buddha once said, "There is no path to walk on, no mirror to polish." This ancient wisdom illuminates the profound delusion that spiritual seeking can become. The monk's journey represents our endless search for something outside ourselves, believing that enlightenment exists somewhere else, with someone else, at some other time. Why do we create these elaborate spiritual roads in our minds? Zen Buddhism points to our fundamental misunderstanding of what we're actually seeking. We imagine enlightenment as a destination to be reached, rather than recognizing it as our natural state to be uncovered. This creates what Zen calls seeking mind, the very activity that obscures what we're looking for. Consider how often we approach our spiritual lives like the traveling monk. We accumulate teachings, attend workshops, read countless books, and follow various practices, always believing that the next teacher, the next retreat, or the next technique will finally deliver us to spiritual fulfillment. Meanwhile, we miss the simple truth that what we seek has never been absent. This seeking mind operates in every area of our lives. In relationships, we search for the perfect partner who will complete us. In careers, we chase the ideal job that will finally make us happy. In material pursuits, we believe the next purchase will satisfy our deepest longings. Each of these represents a road we've constructed in our minds, a journey towards something we imagine we lack. Zen master Huang Po taught, "Your everyday mind, that is the way." The road we seek is not something to be traveled, but something to be recognized right where we are. Every moment of seeking takes us further from what has always been present. Every step on our imaginary spiritual road leads us away from the simple awareness that needs no improvement. The master's question, "From where do you see a road?" points to the observer behind all our seeking. Who is it that sees a path? Who experiences the journey? When we turn our attention to the one who seeks rather than what is being sought, we discover that the seeker and the sought are not separate. The road exists only in the mind that imagines itself separate from its destination. This doesn't mean that spiritual practice is useless or that teachers serve no purpose. Rather, it points to the proper understanding of practice. True practice is not about getting somewhere, but about being where we are with complete presence. It's not about becoming enlightened, but about recognizing the enlightenment that has never been hidden. Tonight, as you reflect on your own spiritual seeking, can you notice the roads you've created in your mind? The stories about where you need to go, what you need to achieve, or who you need to become. As the Buddha taught, look within. You are the Buddha. The destination of every spiritual road is the recognition that there was never anywhere to go. Our next story reveals the profound simplicity of present moment awareness. This is Gassan's stream. A young, earnest student approached Master Gassan with urgency written across his face. His brow was furrowed with the intense concentration of someone struggling against an invisible opponent. For months, he had been dedicating himself to meditation with unwavering determination, yet his mind seemed to grow more chaotic rather than peaceful. "Master," he said, his voice tight with frustration, "I have been meditating for months now. I tried desperately to empty my mind, to stop the endless stream of thoughts, but they only seem to grow louder and more insistent. What is the true path to enlightenment? How can I find the peace that seems to elude me?" Garson, who was tending to his small garden with unhurried movements, did not look up from his work. The master's hands moved gently through the soil, pulling weeds with the same care he might show a delicate flower. The silence stretched between them, filled only by the sounds of nature surrounding the monastery. After what felt like an eternity to the anxious student, Ghassan asked softly, "Do you hear the sound of the nearby stream?" The student paused, his attention shifting from his internal struggle to the world beyond his racing thoughts. He listened carefully and gradually became aware of the gentle murmur of water flowing over rocks somewhere in the distance. "Yes, Master," he replied, wondering where this simple question might lead. "I can hear it." Ghassan straightened up slowly, looked directly into the student's eyes with a gaze both gentle and penetrating, and said simply, "Enter there." The student stood frozen as the instruction echoed in his mind. In that moment, he realized his fundamental mistake. He had been fighting his thoughts like an enemy to be defeated, when the path was not through struggle, but through simply entering the stream of present moment awareness. Buddha's wisdom reminds us, do not believe in anything simply because you have heard it, but when you observe and analyze for yourself, and you find that it agrees with reason and is conducive to the good and benefit of one, then accept it and live up to it. The heart of this lesson lies in the difference between forcing and allowing, between fighting our experience and entering it fully. Why do we struggle so intensely with meditation and mindfulness? This ancient wisdom illuminates several patterns that create unnecessary suffering in our spiritual practice. We approach meditation like a war to be won, rather than a river to enter. We believe that spiritual progress means eliminating thoughts rather than changing our relationship to them. Our culture teaches us to solve problems through effort and control. When we bring this same mentality to meditation, we create what Zen calls meditation sickness, the exhausting attempt to manipulate our inner experience. We sit down to meditate with an agenda, to achieve certain states, to stop certain thoughts, or to feel a particular way. This agenda itself becomes the obstacle. Consider how this pattern shows up in daily life. When we're stressed at work, we often try to force ourselves to relax. When we're anxious about a situation, we struggle to stop worrying. When we're sad, we resist the feeling and try to think our way to happiness. Each of these approaches is like trying to swim upstream against the natural flow of our experience. Ghassan's instruction to enter there points to a completely different approach. The stream represents the natural flow of present moment awareness that is always available. Instead of fighting the current of our thoughts and emotions, we learn to step into the flow of what is actually happening right now. Zen teacher Jon Kabat-Zinn explains, "Mindfulness is about being fully awake in our lives. It is about perceiving the exquisite vividness of each moment. This vividness is the stream Ghassan speaks of. It includes our thoughts, but it's much larger than them. It encompasses the sounds around us, the sensations in our body, the quality of light, the feeling of air on our skin. When we enter the stream of present moment awareness, we discover that thoughts are just one aspect of a much richer experience. They arise and pass away like clouds in the sky, but they no longer define our entire reality. We learn to rest in the spacious awareness that observes thoughts rather than being caught up in their content. This shift from fighting to entering requires what Zen calls don't know mind, the willingness to stop trying to control our experience and instead become curious about it. What does this anxiety actually feel like in the body? What happens to anger when we stop resisting it and simply observe its energy? How do thoughts change when we neither suppress them nor believe them completely? The stream of present moment awareness is always flowing, always available, regardless of our circumstances. In traffic, we can enter the stream by noticing the sensation of breathing instead of only focusing on our frustration. During a difficult conversation, we can step into awareness of our feet on the ground even as we engage with challenging emotions. In moments of joy, we can fully receive the experience instead of immediately thinking about how to keep it. Tonight, as thoughts arise in your mind, can you practice entering the stream rather than fighting the current? Perhaps you'll notice the sounds around you, the sensation of your body resting, or the simple fact of being aware itself. As the Buddha taught, the mind is everything. What you think you become. When we enter the stream of present awareness, we become peace itself. Let us now turn to a tale about the nature of mind itself. This is Bring Me Your Mind. A monk approached Master Shuzan with deep distress evident in every aspect of his being. His face was drawn with worry, his hands trembled slightly, and his breath came in quick, shallow bursts. The weight of his mental anguish was so heavy it seemed to bow his shoulders as he walked. "Master," he exclaimed, his voice filled with desperation. "My mind is like a wild horse. It gallops endlessly with fear, anger, and countless distractions. Anxiety races through my thoughts from morning until night. I cannot tame this beast within me. Please, I beg you, pacify my mind for me. I can no longer bear this torment." Master Shuzan looked at the troubled monk with eyes that held both compassion and understanding. He had seen this same suffering in countless students who came seeking relief from their mental turmoil. After a moment of contemplation, he nodded slowly. "Very well," Shuzan said with gentle authority. "I will help you. But first, you must do something for me. Go and find this mind of yours that causes you so much trouble. Bring it here to me, and I will pacify it for you." The monk bowed gratefully and returned to his quarters with renewed hope. Finally, he had found a master who would solve his problem. He sat down on his meditation cushion with great determination and began to search for his mind. If he could just locate it, grasp it somehow, he could present it to the master and find the peace he desperately sought. He looked everywhere within himself. He searched inside his head, expecting to find this wild horse mind hiding behind his thoughts. He examined his heart, wondering if the mind lived there among his emotions. He tried to identify its color, its shape, its exact location within his body. He attempted to catch hold of individual thoughts as they arose, thinking perhaps if he gathered enough of them, he could present his mind to the master. Hours passed as he searched with increasing intensity. He looked for the mind that worried, the mind that feared, the mind that suffered. But the more he looked for this thing he called his wild mind, the more elusive it became. He could find thoughts arising and passing away. He could observe emotions emerging and dissolving. He could notice sensations appearing and disappearing. But he could not find the single, solid entity he had been calling his troublesome mind. Exhausted and humbled by his fruitless search, he returned to Master Shuzan the next morning. The master looked at him expectantly. "Well?" asked Shuzan with a slight smile. "Have you brought me your mind?" The monk stood before his teacher, no longer agitated, but instead filled with a profound puzzlement. "Master," he confessed quietly, "I have searched everywhere, but I cannot find it. This mind I've been so troubled by seems to have no substance I can grasp." Master Shuzan's smile broadened with gentle satisfaction. "There," he said softly, "it is pacified." As the Buddha observed, All conditioned things are impermanent. Work out your salvation with diligence. What emerges from this story is the recognition that our mental suffering often comes from treating temporary, flowing experiences as solid, permanent problems that need to be fixed. Why do we struggle with the illusion of having a problematic mind that needs to be controlled? Zen Buddhism reveals that this struggle arises from a fundamental misunderstanding about the nature of consciousness itself. We imagine that our thoughts and emotions are produced by something called my mind, as if there were a separate entity inside us generating our experience. This reification of mind creates immense unnecessary suffering. We develop an adversarial relationship with our own consciousness, believing that we must manage, control, or fix our mental states. We speak of having a good day or bad day mentally, as if our mind were a separate thing that sometimes cooperates and sometimes rebels against us. Look deeply at your own experience of mental distress. When anxiety arises, notice how quickly we begin to think about my anxiety, as if it were a solid thing we possess. When sadness appears, we identify with it completely, saying, I am depressed, rather than sadness is present. This subtle shift in language reflects a profound shift in our relationship to experience. Zen practice reveals that what we call mind is actually a flowing process rather than a thing. Thoughts arise spontaneously from emptiness and dissolve back into emptiness. Emotions emerge, peak, and naturally subside when we don't interfere with their natural flow. The very awareness that observes these phenomena cannot itself be found as an object. Consider how this understanding applies to daily mental struggles. When we're caught in worry, instead of trying to stop worrying, we can investigate. Where exactly is this worry located? What does it look like? When we examine anxiety closely, we often find shifting sensations in the body, rapid thoughts about the future, and a quality of mental energy, but no solid thing that could be called anxiety. Vietnamese Zen master Thich Nhat Hanh taught, thanks to impermanence, everything is possible. The impermanent nature of mental states is actually good news. It means that difficult emotions and challenging thoughts are naturally temporary. They arise, exist for a time, and pass away without our needing to do anything about them. This doesn't mean we become passive about our mental health or ignore genuine psychological suffering. Rather, it means we learn to work with our minds skillfully rather than against them. Instead of trying to eliminate difficult thoughts, we learn to observe them with curious awareness. Instead of fighting emotions, we learn to feel them fully and let them move through us naturally. The Buddha said, "You are what you think. All that you are arises with your thoughts. With your thoughts, you make the world." When we stop trying to find and fix a problematic mind, we discover that our thoughts and emotions are much more workable than we imagined. Their experiences arising in awareness, not solid problems requiring solutions. The Master's simple declaration that the mind is pacified points to a profound truth. The peace we seek is not something we create, but something we uncover by stopping our efforts to create it. When we cease searching for a mind to fix, we discover the natural peace of awareness itself. Tonight, as various thoughts and emotions arise, can you practice looking for the one who is having these experiences? Can you search for this mind that seems to need so much management? As the Buddha taught, in the end, only three things matter: how much you loved, how gently you lived, and how gracefully you let go. Perhaps we can learn to let go of the very idea that our minds need our constant management. Now, let us explore a Zen story about the nature of mental burden. This is the weight of the glass. A Zen teacher entered her classroom carrying a simple glass filled halfway with clear water. Her students, gathered in a circle around her, expected the familiar question they had heard in countless teachings about optimism and perspective. They prepared themselves to discuss whether the glass was half empty or half full, ready to demonstrate their philosophical understanding. Instead, the teacher held the glass up for everyone to see and asked something entirely unexpected. "How heavy is this glass of water?" The students looked at each other uncertainly, then began calling out their best estimates. 200 grams, shouted one. Maybe 300, suggested another. I think closer to 500 grams, offered a third student confidently. The teacher listened to their answers with a gentle smile, then shook her head slowly. The absolute weight doesn't matter at all, she said, her voice carrying the wisdom of years of teaching. The weight you experience depends entirely on how long I hold it. She demonstrated by holding the glass steady in her outstretched hand. If I hold it for a minute, she continued, it feels quite light, almost effortless. If I hold it for an hour, my arm will begin to ache and tremble. If I hold it for an entire day, my arm will feel numb and paralyzed, completely unable to function. The teacher paused, allowing her words to settle into the minds of her students. Notice that the actual weight of the glass never changes, but the longer I hold it, the heavier it becomes in my experience. This is exactly how your mental burdens work. She set the glass down on a small table with deliberate care. Your worries about the future, your regrets about the past, your obsessive thoughts about problems you cannot solve. They are exactly like this glass of water. Think about them briefly, and nothing harmful happens. Think about them a bit longer, and they begin to cause discomfort. Think about them all day long, carrying them with you from morning until night, and you will feel paralyzed, incapable of enjoying anything life offers. The teacher looked around the circle at her students' faces, seeing recognition dawning in their eyes. The solution is simple, she concluded. Remember to put the glass down. The Buddha taught, holding on to anger is like grasping a hot coal with the intent of throwing it at someone else. You are the one who gets burned. This tale unveils the profound truth that our suffering often comes not from our problems themselves, but from our inability to set them down when they serve no useful purpose. Why do we carry mental burdens far longer than necessary? This ancient wisdom illuminates several patterns that keep us trapped in unnecessary suffering. We've been conditioned to believe that constant worry demonstrates care and responsibility. We imagine that if we stop thinking about a problem, we're being negligent or irresponsible. This creates a cycle where we feel obligated to carry mental burdens, even when they serve no constructive purpose. Our minds also confuse repetitive thinking with problem solving. We replay difficult conversations, rehearse future scenarios, and analyze past mistakes, believing this mental activity will somehow improve our situation. In reality, most of this mental carrying is just mental carrying. It doesn't change anything except our own well-being. Consider how this plays out in your daily life. You have a difficult conversation with a colleague on Monday morning. If you think about it briefly, process what happened, and consider how to handle similar situations in the future, the mental burden remains light and useful. But if you carry that conversation with you all week, replaying it during your commute, during lunch, before sleep, the weight becomes unbearable. Similarly, concern about an upcoming medical appointment serves a purpose when it motivates you to prepare questions or arrange your schedule. But when that same concern becomes a constant companion, following you through every moment of the day, it transforms from helpful preparation into harmful preoccupation. Zen Buddhism distinguishes between what it calls thinking and being thought by our thoughts. When we think consciously and purposefully, we use our minds as tools. When we're being thought by our thoughts, our minds use us, dragging us into endless cycles of rumination and worry. Zen teacher Pema Chodron reminds us, "You are the sky, everything else is just the weather." Our worries and concerns are like weather patterns moving through the vast sky of our awareness. When we identify completely with the weather, we forget that we are the sky itself, spacious, unchanging, capable of holding any experience without being damaged by it. The practice of setting down our mental burdens requires what Zen calls right effort. This doesn't mean suppressing thoughts or pretending problems don't exist. Instead, it means learning to engage with our concerns skillfully. We pick up the glass when we need to drink from it, then we set it down. We engage with problems when engagement is useful, then we release them when continued thinking becomes mere carrying. This skill develops gradually through mindfulness practice. We begin to notice when we're carrying mental burdens unnecessarily. We catch ourselves replaying old conversations or rehearsing future scenarios that may never occur. In those moments, we have a choice. We can continue carrying the glass, or we can practice setting it down. The Buddha said, "Let go of what has passed. Let go of what may come. Let go of what is happening now. Don't try to figure anything out. Don't try to make anything happen. Relax right now and rest." This teaching points to the profound relief available when we practice conscious non-carrying. Setting down mental burdens doesn't mean becoming careless or irresponsible. It means distinguishing between useful engagement with our challenges and habitual mental carrying that serves no purpose. It means learning to trust that our problems will still be there when we need to address them. But we don't need to carry them every moment of every day. Tonight, as your mind reaches for familiar worries or begins to replay old situations, can you notice the weight of these mental glasses? Can you practice the radical act of setting them down, even if just for a few moments? As the Buddha taught, nothing can harm you as much as your own thoughts unguarded. Perhaps the greatest protection we can offer ourselves is learning when to put the glass down. Let us continue our journey with a story about ego and true authority. This is the governor's visit. The governor of the province was a man accustomed to immediate recognition and elaborate ceremony wherever he traveled. His position commanded respect throughout the land, and he had grown comfortable with the deference shown to him by merchants, officials, and common citizens alike. When he decided to visit the renowned Zen master Dayun, he expected to be received with the same honor and attention that marked all his other encounters. Upon arriving at the simple temple nestled in the mountains, the governor was surprised to be greeted not by a delegation of monks, but by a young novice who barely looked up from sweeping the courtyard. "The master is in his quarters," the novice said simply, pointing toward a modest building before returning to his work. The governor's face flushed with irritation at this casual treatment, but he composed himself and strode toward the master's dwelling. Without pausing to announce himself or wait for permission, the governor pushed open the door and entered the master's quarters. He found Dayun sitting in meditation, facing a plain wall, his back toward the entrance. The room was sparse, containing only a meditation cushion, a small table, and a window that looked out onto the garden. The governor waited for the master to turn and acknowledge his presence, but Dayun remained perfectly still, absorbed in his practice. Minutes passed in silence, and the governor's irritation grew into anger. How dare this simple monk ignore a person of his stature and importance? Unable to contain himself any longer, the governor announced loudly, "Do you not know who I am? I am the governor of this entire province. How can you, a simple monk, refuse to acknowledge my presence? This is an insult to my position and to the authority I represent." Without turning around or speaking a word, Dayun reached for a small stick beside his cushion. With deliberate, unhurried movements, he drew a perfect circle in the dust on the floor near where he sat. The governor watched, confused by this strange response to his outburst. Next, Dayun drew a straight line through the middle of the circle, dividing it cleanly in two. The governor stared at the simple drawing, his anger beginning to mix with puzzlement. What was this monk trying to communicate through these meaningless marks in the dust? Then, with the same calm deliberation, Dayun erased the line he had just drawn, smoothing the dust until no trace of the division remained. Finally, he erased the circle itself, sweeping the dust until the floor showed no sign that anything had ever been drawn there. Throughout this entire demonstration, he never turned around, never spoke, never acknowledged the governor's presence or position. The governor stood in stunned silence as the meaning of the master's actions slowly penetrated his consciousness. His anger dissolved into confusion, then gradually transformed into a glimmer of profound understanding. The circle represented wholeness, unity, the undivided nature of existence. The line showed how we create artificial divisions, separations between self and other, important and unimportant, governor and monk. And the erasure revealed the temporary nature of all these constructions. Quietly, with a humility he had not felt in years, the governor bowed deeply to the still-seated master and left the room. Dayun had shown him that titles, ego, and social position are merely temporary marks in the dust of existence. To cling to them as real and permanent is to cling to nothing at all. Ancient Buddhist wisdom tells us, form is emptiness, emptiness is form. The deeper teaching here shows us how completely we can become identified with temporary roles and positions, forgetting the essential nature that exists beyond all labels and titles. Why do we cling so desperately to our identities and the recognition they seem to demand? This struggle often arises from what Zen calls ego grasping, the deep-seated belief that we are the roles we play, rather than the awareness that witnesses all roles. We become so identified with our job titles, social positions, accomplishments, and relationships that we forget these are simply temporary clothing for our essential being. Consider how this pattern manifests in your own life. Notice how differently you feel when someone acknowledges your expertise versus when they ignore or dismiss you. Observe the internal reactions when your opinion is valued versus when it's overlooked. These responses reveal how much of our sense of self depends on external validation and recognition. The governor's demand for acknowledgement represents our constant need to have our identity confirmed by others. We present our credentials, our achievements, our importance, expecting others to mirror back our self-concept. When this doesn't happen, we experience it as a threat to our very existence, rather than simply a failure of others to play along with our self-created story. Zen practice reveals that what we take to be our solid, important self is actually a collection of ever-changing thoughts, emotions, sensations, and social roles. Like the circle and line drawn in dust, these aspects of identity are real in the moment but have no permanent substance. They arise, exist for a time, and naturally dissolve when we stop reinforcing them. This doesn't mean we should neglect our responsibilities or pretend that social roles don't matter in practical terms. A surgeon needs to know surgery, a parent needs to care for their children, a teacher needs to share knowledge. But we can fulfill these roles without becoming trapped by them, without needing constant confirmation that we are important, special, or worthy of recognition. Vietnamese Zen master Thich Nhat Hanh taught, "Thanks to impermanence, everything is possible." The impermanent nature of all identities is actually liberating news. It means we're not trapped by our past mistakes, current limitations, or social positions. Each moment offers the possibility of relating to ourselves and others from fresh awareness rather than from fixed identity. The Master's silent teaching points to what Zen calls original face, the essential nature that exists before and after all our temporary roles and identities. This original face needs no recognition, seeks no validation, and requires no defense. It simply is, complete and whole, regardless of external circumstances. When we rest in this deeper identity, we can engage with our various roles lightly, like actors who play their parts fully, while never forgetting they are not the characters they portray. We can be responsible governors, dedicated parents, or skilled professionals without needing these roles to define our worth or determine our peace of mind. The Buddha said, "Better than 1,000 hollow words is one word that brings peace." Sometimes the most profound teaching comes through silence and simple gestures rather than elaborate explanations. The Master's wordless demonstration spoke more powerfully than any lecture about the nature of ego and identity. Tonight, as you notice the desire for recognition or the sting of being overlooked, can you remember the circles drawn in dust? Can you see how the identity that feels so important and solid is actually as temporary as marks that can be erased with a simple gesture? As the Buddha taught, in the end, only 3 things matter: how much you loved, how gently you lived, and how gracefully you let go of things not meant for you. Perhaps what we're meant to let go of most completely is the heavy burden of maintaining and defending our constructed sense of self. Let us now explore a story about appreciation, privilege, and how genuine scarcity can reveal the extraordinary within the ordinary. This is the taste of hunger. Master Sengai looked thoughtfully at the group of distinguished visitors who had gathered in his temple's main hall. Upper-ranking samurai with their fine silk garments, wealthy merchants adorned with expensive accessories, all people accustomed to the finest foods and most elegant dining experiences that money could provide. These were individuals who had never known genuine hunger, never questioned where their next meal would come from, never experienced the simple desperation of an empty stomach. "Come to my temple," the master announced with a mischievous smile, "and I'll treat you to a meal of boiled rice and barley." There was something in his tone that suggested more than casual hospitality, perhaps an experiment, or a teaching wrapped in the guise of a simple invitation. The master's unusual invitation had piqued the curiosity of these privileged guests. They were accustomed to elaborate banquets with multiple courses, rare delicacies, expensive sake, and artistic presentations that elevated dining to an aesthetic experience. What could this humble Zen master possibly offer that would interest people of their refined tastes? Nevertheless, intrigued by the novelty and perhaps by respect for the master's reputation, they accepted his invitation and assembled at the temple on the appointed day. When lunchtime arrived, the guests settled themselves expectantly, prepared to discover what special twist Master Sengai might put on such simple fare. But as time passed, no food appeared. They waited politely at first, assuming there had been some minor delay in preparation. Perhaps the master was adding special touches or preparing the meal with particular ceremonial care. Hours went by. The guests began peering discreetly toward the kitchen, hoping to glimpse some sign that their promised meal was being prepared. Their stomachs started to rumble quietly, then more insistently. By mid-afternoon, their initial curiosity had transformed into genuine hunger, then into the kind of ravenous emptiness they had never experienced in their comfortable lives. Master Sengai sat by the fireside throughout this entire ordeal, appearing completely unaware that his guests were growing progressively weaker from hunger. He seemed absorbed in quiet contemplation, occasionally tending the fire or sipping tea, showing no sign of remembering his promised hospitality or noticing his guests' increasing discomfort. Some 3 hours after the normal lunchtime, when the wealthy visitors were rubbing their empty stomachs and feeling lightheaded from lack of food, individual lunch trays were finally brought in and placed before each of the diners. The guests eagerly examined their long-awaited meal, expecting that the extensive delay had resulted in something special that would justify their prolonged fast. Instead, they discovered that each tray contained nothing more than plain boiled barley and rice, accompanied by 4 wrinkled shreds of pickled radish. There were no elaborate preparations, no artistic arrangements, no expensive ingredients. Just the most basic peasant food, the kind of simple fare that poor people might eat every day. One of the guests, perhaps hoping for additional courses or at least some soup to accompany this austere offering, asked hopefully, "Your Reverence, aren't we going to have cold broth with this meal?" Master Sengai's reply was matter-of-fact and final. The invitation was for boiled barley and rice. There was no invitation for cold broth. Yet something remarkable had occurred during their hours of waiting. In the extremity of their genuine hunger, these sophisticated diners discovered that the plain boiled barley and rice tasted absolutely delicious. The simple flavors seemed more complex and satisfying than the finest delicacies they had ever consumed. Every grain had flavor, every bite brought genuine pleasure, and the humble meal became a feast of appreciation. After everyone had eaten, with obvious enjoyment and satisfaction, Master Sengai turned to his guests and quietly offered his teaching. When your stomach is empty, even boiled barley and rice tastes delicious. Buddha spoke of this when he said, "Health is the greatest gift, contentment the greatest wealth, faithfulness the best relationship." Here we discover a teaching about how genuine appreciation arises not from abundance, but from understanding the true nature of our needs and the conditions that allow us to recognize life's fundamental gifts. This story unveils something profound about the relationship between scarcity and appreciation. The wealthy guests had spent their lives surrounded by luxury, consuming elaborate meals without truly tasting them, because abundance had numbed their capacity for genuine gratitude. Only when they experienced real hunger could they recognize the extraordinary pleasure available in ordinary food. Why does abundance so often lead to decreased appreciation rather than increased gratitude? This paradox reveals how our capacity for enjoyment becomes dulled when we have constant access to pleasures without any contrast or effort required to obtain them. We take for granted what we never lack, missing the inherent wonder in life's basic gifts because they're always available. The master's decision to make his guests wait wasn't cruelty, but compassion, a way of temporarily removing the comfortable assumptions that prevented them from experiencing direct appreciation. By creating artificial scarcity, he revealed the artificial nature of their sophisticated tastes and showed them the authentic pleasure that had been available all along, hidden beneath layers of expectation and entitlement. This ancient wisdom illuminates our modern relationship with consumption and satisfaction. We live in cultures of unprecedented abundance, yet surveys consistently show decreasing levels of happiness and life satisfaction. The more we have, the more we seem to need for contentment, creating an endless cycle of desire that prevents us from recognizing the sufficiency that already exists. Consider how often we consume food, entertainment, experiences, or material goods without genuine presence or appreciation, simply because they're easily available. The hurried meal eaten while checking email. The beautiful sunset ignored because we see one every day. The comfortable bed taken for granted because we've never spent a night on the ground. Master Sengai's experiment demonstrates that appreciation is not a luxury that comes after our basic needs are met, but a practice that reveals how abundantly our basic needs are already being fulfilled. When we bring full attention to simple experiences, a drink of clean water when genuinely thirsty, warm shelter when actually cold, quiet rest when truly tired, we discover treasures that no amount of external accumulation can provide. This teaching also reveals our tendency to confuse complexity with quality, elaboration with satisfaction. The wealthy guests had been conditioned to believe that expensive, complicated foods were superior to simple ones, but their experience of genuine hunger revealed this to be a mental construct rather than a physical reality. Their bodies responded with pleasure to plain rice and barley because that's exactly what they needed. Zen practice cultivates what might be called grateful presence, the ability to meet whatever appears with full attention and appreciation, rather than comparing it to some imagined alternative. When we can receive simple offerings with the same openness we bring to elaborate gifts, we discover that every meal has the potential to be a feast. Every moment holds the possibility of deep satisfaction. We also find ourselves confronted by questions about privilege and its effect on perception. The guests' wealth had insulated them from experiences that could reveal life's fundamental goodness. Sometimes blessings come disguised as temporary limitations that restore our capacity for wonder and gratitude. Additionally, our minds tend to assume that more options, higher quality, and greater variety automatically lead to increased enjoyment. Master Sengai's lesson suggests the opposite, that genuine pleasure often comes from bringing full presence to simple experiences rather than constantly seeking more sophisticated ones. The story points us toward understanding the difference between appetite and hunger, craving and genuine need. The guests arrived with appetites shaped by habit and expectation, but left having experienced authentic hunger and its natural satisfaction. This distinction helps us recognize when our desires arise from real needs versus conditioned patterns of consumption. Tonight, as you eat your next meal, can you bring the attention of someone who has been genuinely hungry? What would it mean to approach simple pleasures, a warm drink, comfortable clothing, a safe place to sleep, with the appreciation that comes from truly recognizing their value rather than taking them for granted? As the Buddha taught, let us rise up and be thankful, for if we didn't learn a lot today, at least we learned a little. And if we didn't learn a little, at least we didn't get sick. And if we got sick, at least we didn't die. So let us all be thankful. True abundance is revealed not through accumulating more, but through recognizing the sufficiency that already surrounds us in each moment. Let us now turn to a tale about the nature of seeking and finding. This is the master sculptor's discovery. In a bustling stone quarry beneath towering mountains, a master sculptor moved among the marble blocks with the practiced eye of one who had spent decades coaxing beauty from stone. The morning sun cast golden light across the quarry, illuminating countless blocks that seemed to whisper their stories to him. "Aha!" he would say, running his weathered hands across smooth surfaces. "There is a heroic figure locked in that piece, and a saint trapped inside that other one." His reputation had grown precisely because of this gift, his ability to sense what he called the suchness of every stone, to see beyond raw material to its true nature waiting to be released. But on this morning, the sculptor's heart carried a different weight. For over 40 years, he had been searching for something special, the perfect block from which he could create his masterwork, a glorious statue of the Buddha. His energies were waning now, and still this elusive Buddha block remained hidden from him. He had traveled to great quarries around the world, consulted experts, hired specialists to scour remote areas. Yet nowhere could he find that one perfect slab that would allow him to release the most perfect likeness of Buddha. Feeling the weight of his lifelong quest, the sculptor sought consolation from a local Zen priest who headed a small temple at the end of his street. The temple was modest, with a peaceful courtyard where a stone well sat, surrounded by carefully tended moss. "Master," the sculptor said, bowing deeply, "I have searched for 40 years for the perfect stone from which to carve the Buddha. My life's work remains incomplete." The priest listened with kind eyes, then smiled gently. "No problem," he said with such simplicity that the sculptor felt both confused and hopeful. "Do you mean you can tell me where I might find the perfect material from which I can release the Buddha of my dreams?" the sculptor asked, excitement rising in his voice. "Of course." "Where?" The priest raised his hand and pointed across the courtyard. "Over there," he said, indicating the stone well. The excited sculptor hurried to the well and peered down into the still, dark water. There, looking back at him with the same questioning eyes, the same lined face marked by years of searching, was his own reflection. Buddha's wisdom reminds us, if you cannot find the truth right where you are, where else do you expect to find it? The deeper teaching here shows us that what we seek most desperately often lies not in some distant place or perfect circumstance, but in the very ground of our own being. Why do we exhaust ourselves searching everywhere except within? Zen Buddhism reveals that we become so focused on the object of our search that we forget to examine the searcher. The sculptor had examined thousands of stones, traveled countless miles, yet never considered that the very consciousness doing the seeking was itself the perfect material for awakening. Consider how often throughout your day you postpone contentment waiting for better circumstances. I'll be happy when I get the promotion, find the right partner, when conditions are finally perfect. This is seeking the Buddha block everywhere, except in the reflection looking back at us right now. Zen Master Huangpo taught, "Your everyday mind, that is the way." The sculptor's profound realization wasn't that he needed to become something different, but that he needed to recognize what he already was. The perfect material for expressing Buddha nature isn't found in external circumstances, but in the awareness that recognizes, seeks, and creates. The well represents the still point within consciousness, where seeking ends and finding begins. When we stop looking outward and peer into the depths of our own awareness, we discover that the one who seeks and the sought are the same. In Zen practice, we speak of original face, the essential nature that exists before conditioning. This original face isn't hidden in some special place. It's looking back at us from every mirror, every moment of genuine presence. Tonight, as you encounter the reflection of your own seeking mind, can you recognize the Buddha nature that has been with you all along? Perhaps it appears in your capacity for wonder, your longing for truth, or simply in the awareness that notices these very words. As the Buddha taught, look within, you are the Buddha. The masterwork you've been seeking isn't waiting for perfect materials. It's waiting for the recognition that the artist, the art, and the awareness that appreciates beauty are all expressions of the same essential nature. Let us now turn to a story about the deceptive nature of appearances and the masks we wear in seeking acceptance. This is the tale of the hungry abbot and the generous robe. In a bustling merchant quarter of an ancient Chinese city, where silk traders and wealthy families built elaborate houses behind high walls, there lived a man whose prosperity was known throughout the region. His mansion boasted carved jade doorways, courtyards filled with exotic birds, and servants who attended to every detail of daily life. This man took great pride in his position and was particular about maintaining his reputation among other prominent citizens. One morning, as autumn rain fell steadily on the cobblestone streets, a figure approached his ornate front gate. The visitor was a Zen abbot from a mountain monastery, but he appeared as nothing more than a beggar. His simple brown robes were patched and worn thin from years of use. His sandals were cracked and muddy from walking mountain paths, and his wooden begging bowl showed the stains and scratches of countless meals received in charity. The abbot stood quietly at the gate, rain dripping from his shaved head, and waited with the patient dignity that comes from years of spiritual practice. When the gatekeeper finally noticed him, the man's expression immediately showed disdain. "What do you want, beggar?" the gatekeeper asked harshly, not bothering to bow or show any respect. "This is the house of an important man. We have no scraps for wanderers." "I am traveling and seeking alms," the abbot replied gently. "Perhaps your master would offer a simple meal to a monk." The gatekeeper looked him up and down with obvious contempt. These ragged clothes, this worn appearance. Clearly this was just another vagrant trying to take advantage of his master's household. "Be gone," he commanded. "My master does not waste food on beggars. Seek your charity elsewhere." The abbot accepted this rejection without anger or argument. He simply bowed, turned, and walked back into the rain, his empty bowl tucked beneath his arm. Several hours later, as the afternoon sun broke through the clouds, the same figure returned to the same gate. But now everything had changed. The abbot wore his formal ceremonial robes, rich golden silk embroidered with intricate patterns, a magnificent purple sash across his shoulders, and prayer beads carved from precious wood. His bearing remained humble, but his appearance now spoke unmistakably of high spiritual rank and monastery wealth. This time, when the gatekeeper saw him approaching, his entire demeanor transformed. "Welcome, honored master," he exclaimed, bowing deeply. Please enter. My master will be so pleased to receive such a distinguished visitor." The rich man himself hurried out to greet the abbot personally, offering elaborate bows and flowery words of welcome. "Venerable sir, what an honor for our humble household. You must join us for our finest meal. Please allow us to serve you." They ushered the abbot into their most elegant dining room, where servants quickly prepared a sumptuous feast. Delicate fish, perfectly seasoned vegetables, fragrant rice, and sweet desserts filled the low table. The rich man sat opposite the abbot, beaming with pride at his ability to host such an important religious figure. As the first course was served, the abbot did something completely unexpected. Instead of eating, he carefully removed his beautiful ceremonial robe and folded it with great attention. Then, with deliberate precision, he placed the folded robe directly in front of the feast, as if it were the honored guest. Standing up with quiet dignity, the abbot spoke clearly so all present could hear. "This meal is not for me, it is for the robe." Without another word, he walked out of the house, leaving behind both the magnificent feast and the rich man's stunned realization of his own superficial judgment. Buddha's wisdom reminds us, judge not by appearances. A rich heart may be under a poor coat. Here we discover how our fixation on external appearances creates barriers to genuine human connection and spiritual understanding. Why do we judge others so quickly based on their clothing, status symbols, or outward presentation? Zen Buddhism points to our conditioned mind's habit of creating categories and hierarchies based on surface appearances. This mental shortcut allows us to feel we understand people without the more challenging work of seeing their true nature. The rich man's household represents a pattern we all recognize in ourselves. How differently do we treat the well-dressed stranger versus the poorly dressed one? How does our attention change when someone mentions their impressive job title versus their humble occupation? How does our respect shift when we learn someone's wealth or poverty? This ancient wisdom illuminates our tendency to project worth onto external symbols rather than recognizing the inherent dignity of every person. The abbot remained exactly the same person in both encounters. His wisdom, compassion, and spiritual realization unchanged by his clothing. Yet the household's treatment of him transformed completely, based solely on appearances. Look deeply at your own patterns of judgment. Perhaps you find yourself making assumptions about people in expensive cars versus old vehicles, designer clothes versus thrift store finds, prestigious addresses versus modest neighborhoods. Each of these judgments reveals how we've been conditioned to equate external appearance with internal worth. The story points us toward a fundamental question about authenticity. If we receive a different treatment based on our presentation, which version of ourselves is real? Are we the person in casual clothes running errands, or the person dressed professionally for important meetings? Are we the one seeking help, or the one offering it? In Zen practice, we cultivate what's called original face, the authentic self that exists beneath all roles, costumes, and presentations. This original face doesn't change whether we're wearing rags or ceremonial robes, whether others treat us with respect or dismissal. Zen Master Bankei taught, "Your original face is not born and does not die." This teaching invites us to recognize that our essential nature, our capacity for awareness, love, and wisdom remains constant, regardless of how others perceive us or how we present ourselves to the world. The abbot's teaching was not just for the rich man, but for all of us who might witness his story. By feeding the robe instead of himself, he revealed how often we relate to people's personas rather than their essence. We honor the title, the clothing, the symbols of status, while missing the actual human being present before us. Consider how this insight might transform your daily interactions. The server at your restaurant, the clerk at the store, the person asking for directions. Each carries the same essential dignity as the most honored guest. The challenge is seeing past the uniforms, the circumstances, the social roles, to the original face beneath. This doesn't mean we ignore practical realities or social conventions, but that we hold them more lightly. We can acknowledge someone's professional role while remembering their fundamental humanity. We can dress appropriately for occasions while knowing our worth doesn't depend on our wardrobe. Tonight, as you consider the various roles and presentations you inhabit throughout the day, can you sense the unchanging awareness that witnesses all these temporary costumes? Can you feel the original face that remains constant, whether others see you as important or invisible? The Buddha said, "Better than 1,000 hollow words is one word that brings peace." The abbot's silent gesture spoke more powerfully than lengthy sermons about equality and compassion. By walking away from the feast, prepared for his appearance rather than his essence, he offered a teaching that continues to resonate across centuries. Now, let us explore a Zen story about taking responsibility and the spiritual practice of stepping forward when action is needed. This is the tale of 4 characters whose names reveal everything about their approach to life's challenges. In a busy monastery where daily life required countless tasks to maintain harmony and function, there lived 4 individuals whose personalities perfectly matched their names. Everybody, somebody, anybody, and nobody. Each day brought opportunities for service, problems to solve, and responsibilities to shoulder, yet somehow essential work often remained undone. One morning, the head monk announced that an important task needed completion before evening. The temple's water system had developed a leak, and without repair, the community would face serious difficulties. The job required no special skills, only willing hands and basic attention, yet it was crucial for everyone's welfare. Everybody was absolutely certain that somebody would handle the situation. After all, somebody usually took care of important matters, and this seemed like exactly the sort of thing somebody would naturally address. There was no need for everybody to get involved, since somebody's reliability was well known throughout the community. Meanwhile, anybody could have easily fixed the water system. The tools were available, the problem was clearly defined, and anybody possessed the necessary capabilities. However, anybody assumed that since this was obviously important work, it must be designated for someone more official, someone whose specific responsibility this was. As the day progressed, nobody actually wanted to take on the task. Nobody felt motivated to interrupt their planned activities to deal with this unexpected problem. Nobody saw it as their personal obligation, since it hadn't been specifically assigned to them. Nobody preferred to wait and see if the situation would resolve itself or if someone else would step forward. Somebody grew increasingly frustrated as the hours passed. Somebody had expected that anybody would have addressed the issue by now, since it was clearly within anybody's abilities and should have been obvious to anyone paying attention. How could anybody ignore such an important need? Everybody began to realize that nobody was going to handle the situation, even though everybody had been confident that someone would take care of it. Everybody started feeling anxious about the implications, but wasn't quite sure how to proceed, since this wasn't typically everybody's role. As evening approached and the water problem remained unresolved, anybody finally blamed somebody for the neglect, while everybody criticized nobody for the inaction. In the end, nobody did what everybody could have done, anybody was capable of doing, and somebody expected would be handled. As the Buddha observed, if you want to know your past actions, look at your present circumstances. If you want to know your future, look at your present actions. The deeper teaching here shows us how spiritual practice manifests not in grand gestures, but in our willingness to respond to immediate needs without elaborate justification. Why do we hesitate to act when we see something that needs doing? Zen Buddhism points to several mental patterns that create this paralysis. First is the diffusion of responsibility that occurs when we assume others will handle what needs attention. Second is our tendency to categorize tasks as mine or not mine, based on roles and expectations, rather than responding to actual circumstances. Third is our preference for comfort over contribution, when action requires effort or inconvenience. This story illuminates how spiritual seeking can become another form of avoidance if it focuses on internal development while ignoring external needs. True practice integrates contemplative awareness with engaged responsiveness. Meditation that doesn't lead to more skillful action in daily life remains incomplete. The Buddha taught that right action is one of the essential elements of the spiritual path. This isn't about following predetermined rules, but developing the sensitivity to recognize what each situation requires and the willingness to provide it. Sometimes this means stepping forward when others step back. Consider how often you encounter situations where something needs doing and no one is clearly designated to handle it. Perhaps it's picking up litter in a public space, checking on an elderly neighbor, addressing dysfunction in a group, or simply listening to someone who needs to be heard. These moments offer opportunities to practice what Zen calls just do it mind. Master Yun Men taught his students about responding without hesitation, meeting each situation with appropriate action, rather than mental commentary about why someone else should respond. This doesn't mean becoming compulsively helpful, but developing the wisdom to distinguish between authentic need and the ego's desire to be needed. The water leak in the story represents all those seemingly small problems that grow larger when ignored. Relationship tensions that could be addressed with timely conversation. Community issues that could be resolved with modest effort. Personal habits that could be changed before they become entrenched. Environmental problems that could be prevented with simple action. Buddhist teacher Thich Nhat Hanh spoke of engaged Buddhism, the recognition that spiritual development and social responsibility are inseparable. When we truly understand interconnectedness, responding to others' needs feels as natural as caring for our own welfare, because the boundary between self and other becomes permeable. The greatest barrier to effective action is often the story our minds create about why we're not the right person for the job. We're too busy, too important, too inexperienced, or too something else to address what's right in front of us. These internal negotiations consume more energy than simply responding would require. Zen practice cultivates what Korean master Seung-san called "don't know mind," a willingness to act without needing to understand all implications or have permission from some authority. When something needs doing and you can do it, the spiritual response is often simply to begin. Tonight, as you reflect on situations in your life where action is needed, can you notice the difference between legitimate discernment and elaborate avoidance? Perhaps you'll discover that the most profound spiritual practice sometimes looks like nothing more mysterious than seeing what needs doing and doing it without requiring someone else to take responsibility first. As the Buddha taught, better than 1,000 hollow words is one word that brings peace. Sometimes the most peaceful word is the one that says simply, "I'll handle it." As we continue our journey through the wisdom of Zen Buddhism, let us explore a story about the most fundamental truth that surrounds us yet remains invisible. This is the tale of the fish and the ocean. In the vast depths of the Pacific, where sunlight filtered down through layers of blue and green, and coral gardens swayed in gentle currents, a young fish swam restlessly through familiar waters. Despite being surrounded by the wonder of ocean life, schools of silver fish moving like liquid metal, sea anemones dancing in the current, and the rhythmic pulse of waves far above, the young fish felt troubled by a persistent question. One day, approaching an ancient sea turtle whose shell bore the scars and wisdom of countless journeys, the young fish asked earnestly, "Elder, I keep hearing other sea creatures talk about something they call the ocean. They speak of it with such reverence, as if it's the most important thing in existence. But I've searched everywhere, and I cannot find this ocean anywhere. What exactly is this mysterious thing everyone talks about?" The old turtle's eyes, deep and patient like tidal pools, regarded the young fish with gentle amusement. "Little one," the turtle replied in a voice worn smooth by decades of storms and calms, "the ocean is this very thing that surrounds you on all sides at every moment." The young fish looked around frantically, darting left and right, swimming up toward the distant surface and down toward the sandy bottom. "But I don't see anything surrounding me. There's nothing here but water and fish and plants and rocks. Where is this ocean you speak of? Why can't I see it?" The turtle settled more comfortably on a bed of soft kelp, understanding that this was a teaching moment that required patience. "Of course you cannot see it, young friend," the turtle explained. "The ocean is both inside and outside of you. You were born in the ocean. You breathe the ocean. You are nourished by the ocean. And one day you will return to the ocean. The ocean flows through your gills and around your body just as naturally as your own scales cover your skin. It is so much a part of you that it has become invisible." The young fish paused, beginning to sense something vast and fundamental that had been present all along but remained unnamed. "You mean this water I swim through is the ocean?" "Yes," the turtle confirmed. "You have never been separate from it, not for a single moment of your existence. As the Buddha observed, all conditioned things are impermanent. Strive on with awareness." This ancient wisdom illuminates our relationship with the Tao, the fundamental flow of existence that permeates everything, yet remains largely unnoticed in our daily lives. What emerges from this story is a profound teaching about the nature of spiritual blindness. Like the fish who cannot see the ocean, we live immersed in the sacred, but fail to recognize it because it is too close, too constant, too fundamental to our existence to register as separate from ourselves. Why do we struggle to perceive the Tao, this universal flow that sustains and surrounds us? Zen Buddhism points to our habit of seeking the extraordinary while overlooking the ordinary. We imagine that spiritual truth must be dramatic, mystical, or separate from everyday experience. We look for God in burning bushes while missing the divine presence in morning coffee, in the breath entering our lungs, in the simple fact of awareness itself. The Tao expresses itself in everything we encounter: the changing seasons, the cycles of sleep and waking, the rhythm of our heartbeat, the way thoughts arise and dissolve in consciousness. It is the organizing principle behind both the spiral of galaxies and the unfurling of fern leaves, the same pattern expressing itself at every scale of existence. Consider how often throughout your day you might glimpse this underlying flow without recognizing it. The way traffic naturally organizes itself, despite having no central controller. The way conversations find their own rhythm and timing. The way your body breathes without conscious direction. The way solutions to problems seem to emerge from somewhere beyond deliberate thinking. These are all expressions of the Tao working through apparent chaos to create spontaneous order. Zen teacher Alan Watts taught, "Trying to define yourself is like trying to bite your own teeth." The Tao is similar. It cannot be grasped or contained because we are expressions of it rather than separate observers of it. Every attempt to understand the Tao through conceptual thinking is like the fish trying to get outside the ocean to examine it objectively. This doesn't mean the Tao is merely a philosophical concept. It is the most practical and immediate reality. The intelligence that coordinates the trillions of cells in your body, the awareness in which all thoughts and sensations appear, the life force that animates everything from redwood trees to bacteria. In Chinese philosophy, the character for Tao literally means the way or the path. But this is not a path we walk towards some distant destination. It is the path that walks itself through us, the way reality unfolds moment by moment, without requiring our management or control. Lao Tzu wrote, "The Tao that can be spoken is not the eternal Tao." Yet here we are, using words to point towards something beyond words. This is the beautiful paradox of spiritual teaching. We must use the limited to point toward the unlimited, knowing that the finger pointing at the moon is never the moon itself. Tonight, as you feel the breath moving in and out of your body without your conscious control, can you sense the Tao expressing itself through this simple miracle? Can you recognize in this automatic process the same intelligence that moves the planets and changes the seasons? The Buddha taught, "Look within, thou art the Buddha." You are not separate from the ocean of existence any more than a wave is separate from the sea. In recognizing this fundamental non-separation, we stop seeking the Tao and begin living as its conscious expression. Our next story reveals a profound teaching about the universality of loss and the path from isolation to understanding. This is the tale of a mother, her grief, and the Buddha's compassionate wisdom. In a small village where life moves according to ancient rhythms of birth, growth, harvest, and death, a young mother experiences the most devastating loss imaginable. Her child, barely old enough to walk and speak his first words, falls victim to a sudden illness that takes him before any remedy can be found. In a single night, her world transforms from the joy of nurturing new life to the incomprehensible reality of holding her son's lifeless body. Driven by desperation and the fierce love that refuses to accept finality, the mother wraps her child carefully and sets out for the place where the Buddha is known to teach. She has heard stories of his great compassion and miraculous wisdom. Surely, if anyone possesses the power to undo this terrible mistake of fate, it would be this enlightened being who understands the deepest mysteries of existence. She finds the Buddha seated beneath a great tree, surrounded by disciples and villagers who have come seeking guidance. Without ceremony, she approaches and gently places her deceased child at his feet. Her voice, hoarse with grief yet firm with determined hope, carries across the gathered assembly. "Please, Lord Buddha," she pleads, "bring my son back to life. He is everything I have in this world. Without him, my existence has no meaning. I know that your compassion is limitless and your power beyond ordinary understanding. Please, restore my child to me." The Buddha regards her with infinite tenderness, seeing not just her individual suffering, but the universal human condition that she represents. His response carries no trace of dismissal or false consolation, yet neither does it offer the miracle she seeks. "I will help you," he says gently, "but first you must do something for me. Go throughout your village and the surrounding communities. Bring me a single mustard seed, but it must come from a household where no one has ever died. When you return with such a seed, I will restore your son's life." Hope rekindled, the mother carefully lifts her child and begins her search with renewed energy. Mustard seeds are common, surely finding one should be simple. She approaches the first house she encounters, and the family immediately offers to help, reaching for their supply of seeds. "Wait," she stops them, remembering the Buddha's condition. "Has anyone in your household ever died?" The family exchanges glances filled with their own memories of loss. "Oh yes," they reply softly. "We lost our grandmother just 2 years ago, and before that, my brother died in an accident." Their faces show understanding as they realize why she asks, and they cannot provide what she seeks. House after house yields the same pattern. Each family gladly offers mustard seeds, but when she explains the requirement, each must acknowledge their own encounters with death. Parents speak of children lost to disease. Children remember grandparents who have passed. Some households carry recent grief, others older losses, but none have been untouched by mortality's reality. As the day progresses and her search expands to neighboring villages, the mother begins to see her situation from an expanding perspective. In every home, she finds not just willingness to help, but recognition of shared experience. Other mothers have held lifeless children. Other families have struggled with incomprehensible loss. Her agony, while intensely personal, is also universally human. By evening, she has not found a single household that death has never visited. But more importantly, she has found something else. The recognition that suffering, while painful, connects us to the fundamental condition of all living beings, rather than separating us from them. She returns to the Buddha, no longer carrying desperate demands for miraculous intervention, but seeking a different kind of help. Her son's body rests peacefully in her arms, but her relationship to his death has transformed. She bows deeply and says, "Lord Buddha, I understand now. Please teach me about the nature of life and death. Help me find a way to honor my love for my son while learning to live with this loss." Ancient Buddhist wisdom tells us, of all footprints, that of the elephant is supreme. Similarly, of all meditative themes, that on death is supreme. The deeper teaching here shows us that acknowledging the universality of loss can transform isolation into connection and despair into wisdom. Why do we feel so alone when confronted with death and loss, when these experiences are among the most universal aspects of human existence? Buddhist psychology reveals that suffering often compounds itself by creating the illusion that our pain is uniquely unbearable, that others couldn't possibly understand our particular anguish, that we've been singled out for especially cruel treatment by fate. This sense of isolation intensifies grief by cutting us off from the very connections that could provide healing. When we believe our suffering is unprecedented, we resist the comfort and wisdom available from others who have walked similar paths. We push away exactly what we most need: the recognition that love and loss are inseparable throughout human experience. The Buddha's compassionate strategy didn't minimize the mother's grief or rush her toward acceptance. Instead, he guided her toward a direct discovery that would transform her understanding organically. By requiring her to visit household after household, he ensured she would encounter the full spectrum of human loss, while also witnessing how families continue living meaningful lives despite experiencing tragedy. This search served as a form of healing meditation in action. Each conversation with bereaved families became an opportunity for the mother to see her experience reflected in others' stories. Each expression of sympathy from people who recognized her pain created threads of connection that began weaving her back into the fabric of community. The mustard seed itself carries symbolic significance. It's one of the smallest seeds, yet it grows into a substantial plant. This suggests that even tiny acknowledgements of our shared vulnerability can grow into profound understanding and acceptance. The impossible condition the Buddha set wasn't meant to frustrate her, but to lead her toward a different kind of miracle: the transformation of isolated suffering into connected wisdom. Buddhist teacher Pema Chodron writes about the wisdom of no escape, the recognition that attempting to avoid life's inevitable difficulties creates additional suffering beyond the original pain. The mother's initial request represented this very human desire to escape from loss rather than learn how to be with it skillfully. The story also reveals how grief can become a gateway to deeper understanding when met with wisdom rather than denial. The mother's love for her child didn't diminish through accepting his death. Instead, it found a way to honor their connection while acknowledging the temporary nature of all physical forms. In Tibetan Buddhism, there's a practice called taking and giving, where practitioners deliberately contemplate the suffering of others as a way of developing compassion and perspective. The mother's journey inadvertently became such a practice as she discovered that every family carried losses similar to her own. This doesn't mean that individual grief should be minimized or quickly moved through. The particularity of each loss, the specific person, relationship, dreams that have ended, deserves full acknowledgement. But recognizing the universality of loss can prevent grief from becoming a prison that isolates us from life's continuing flow. The Buddha's guidance points toward what might be called grief with company, rather than grief alone. When we understand that millions of parents have loved children who died, that loss is woven into the very structure of existence. Our pain becomes no less real, but somehow more bearable, because it's shared. This story also addresses the natural human tendency to bargain with reality, to seek exceptions to universal laws through spiritual intervention. The mother's request for resurrection reflects our deep resistance to accepting that some changes cannot be undone, that some losses cannot be reversed through sufficient faith, love, or spiritual authority. Instead of resurrection, the Buddha offered something potentially more valuable, a path toward wisdom that could transform her relationship to loss itself. This represents spiritual teaching at its most skillful, meeting people exactly where they are while guiding them toward deeper understanding. The teaching doesn't end with accepting death's inevitability, but points toward how this acceptance can become a foundation for more authentic living. When we truly integrate the reality of impermanence, our remaining time becomes more precious, our relationships more genuine, our priorities clearer. Tonight, as you reflect on the losses you've experienced or fear experiencing, can you sense the vast company of others who have walked similar paths? Perhaps you'll discover that your deepest pain, rather than separating you from others, connects you to the fundamental human experience of loving what cannot last forever. As the Buddha taught, of all things that arise and pass away, loving awareness alone remains constant. This awareness can hold both our love and our loss with equal tenderness. Let us now turn to a tale about the nature of faith and self-doubt. This is the story of the wishing tree. A poor man walked slowly through a dense forest, his shoulders heavy with worry, bills unpaid, relationships strained, dreams deferred. Each step seemed to echo with the weight of his many troubles. The canopy above filtered the sunlight into gentle patterns on the forest floor, but he noticed none of this beauty. His mind churned endlessly through his problems, each thought leading to another worry, another reason why his life felt so difficult. Exhausted from walking and thinking, he stopped to rest against what appeared to be an ordinary tree. Its trunk was wide and welcoming, its bark smooth against his back. As he leaned there, catching his breath, he realized how thirsty he had become. "I wish I had something to drink," he murmured to himself. Instantly, as if materializing from thin air, a cup of cool, clear water appeared in his hand. He stared at it in disbelief, turning the cup this way and that, examining it for some trick or illusion. The water looked pure, inviting. Tentatively, he brought it to his lips and drank. It was the most refreshing water he had ever tasted, cool and sweet, exactly what his parched throat needed. "That was strange," he said aloud, but his stomach chose that moment to growl with hunger. Almost without thinking, he wished for food. A simple but nourishing meal appeared before him on a wooden plate. Fresh bread, ripe fruit, and vegetables that looked as if they had just been harvested. The aroma made his mouth water. He ate slowly, marveling at each bite. "My wishes are being granted," he whispered in amazement. The realization sent a thrill through his entire body. "Well then," he said with growing excitement, "I wish for a beautiful home of my own." Before his eyes, in the meadow just beyond the tree, a magnificent house materialized. It was everything he had ever dreamed of. Spacious rooms filled with light, comfortable furnishings, gardens blooming with flowers. His heart raced with joy as he stood and approached his new home. "If I have such a house," he reasoned, "I'll need help to maintain it." He wished for servants, and immediately several kind-faced people appeared, bowing respectfully and asking how they might serve him. The man laughed with delight, hardly believing his incredible fortune. And what good is a beautiful home without someone special to share it with? He wondered aloud. He wished for a beautiful, loving, intelligent woman to be his companion. A radiant woman appeared beside him, her eyes warm with affection, her smile gentle and knowing. But as she took his hand, something shifted in the man's mind. The rational voice that had whispered doubts throughout his life suddenly grew louder. "Wait a minute," he said, stepping back from the woman.
This is ridiculous. I'm not this lucky. Things like this don't happen to people like me. This can't be real.
As the words left his mouth, everything began to fade. The woman's loving smile dissolved first, then the servants, then the beautiful house, and finally, even the simple meal he had enjoyed. He found himself alone again, leaning against what now seemed like an ordinary tree, with nothing but his original troubles for company. He shook his head knowingly. "I knew it," he muttered, and walked away through the forest, his mind immediately returning to the familiar patterns of worry and complaint that had occupied him before. Buddha's wisdom reminds us, we are what we think. All that we are arises with our thoughts. With our thoughts, we make the world. The heart of this lesson lies in understanding the creative power of belief and the self-sabotaging nature of doubt. Why do we so readily dismiss the good that comes into our lives? Zen Buddhism points to a deeply conditioned pattern in the human mind, the tendency to trust our limitations more than our possibilities. We become so familiar with struggle, so identified with our problems, that abundance feels foreign, even threatening to our sense of self. Consider how often throughout your day you might receive unexpected kindness, notice surprising beauty, or encounter opportunities that could transform your circumstances. How quickly do you dismiss these gifts as coincidence, luck, or too good to be true? This reflexive doubt often causes us to literally walk away from the very blessings we've been seeking. The wishing tree represents the responsive universe that Zen teaches us about, reality that mirrors back our deepest beliefs about what we deserve and what's possible. When we approach life with trust and openness, we often discover resources and opportunities that were always available but previously invisible to us. When we approach with cynicism and self-doubt, these same possibilities seem to vanish. The man in the story had access to everything he needed, but his conditioning told him that someone like him couldn't possibly be worthy of such gifts. His belief in his own limitations became more powerful than the evidence of his senses. This is the tragedy of self-doubt. It causes us to abandon the very solutions to our problems. Zen teacher Suzuki Roshi said, "Each of you is perfect the way you are, and you can use a little improvement." This paradox points to the balance between accepting our inherent worthiness while remaining open to growth. The man under the tree couldn't hold both truths simultaneously, that he was worthy of good things and that positive change was possible in his life. In our modern context, we encounter wishing trees constantly. The colleague who offers genuine friendship, but we assume they have ulterior motives. The job opportunity that seems perfect, but we convince ourselves we're not qualified. The romantic relationship that feels too good to be true, so we sabotage it before it can disappoint us. Each time we choose familiar limitation over unfamiliar possibility, we walk away from our own wishing tree. The Buddha taught, doubt everything, find your own light. But there's a crucial distinction between the doubt that leads to wisdom and the doubt that leads to self-defeat. Wise doubt questions assumptions and seeks truth. Self-defeating doubt assumes the worst about ourselves and our possibilities, then treats these assumptions as facts. Zen practice invites us to notice when we're dismissing good fortune, abundance, or love simply because it doesn't match our habitual story about ourselves. Can we remain open to the possibility that we might be more deserving, more capable, more lovable than our conditioning suggests? Tonight, As you reflect on the day's experiences, can you identify moments when you might have walked away from your own wishing tree? Perhaps a compliment you dismissed, an opportunity you assumed wasn't meant for you, or a moment of joy you cut short because it felt too good to last. What would it mean to trust in your worthiness to receive life's gifts? As the Buddha observed, thousands of candles can be lighted from a single candle, and the life of the candle will not be shortened. Happiness never decreases by being shared. The wishing tree's magic isn't diminished by granting wishes, it's fulfilled by them. And our capacity to receive life's blessings isn't diminished by accepting them, it's expanded. Let us now explore a story about the transformation of power and the profound difference between force and true spiritual strength. This is the Master's shout. In the province where Master Sengai taught, there lived a man named Shobayashi, who had achieved legendary status for his extraordinary ki power. Stories circulated throughout the region of his seemingly supernatural abilities. With a single shout, he could reportedly knock a grown man over from behind a screen, and by staring fiercely at birds in flight, he could bring them tumbling from the sky. People spoke of him with awe and fear, discussing his demonstrations of power in hushed, reverent tones. One day, filled with confidence in his abilities and curious about how they would measure against the spiritual attainments of the famous Zen master, Shobayashi arrived at Master Sengai's temple. "Your Reverence," he announced with the swagger of someone accustomed to impressive victories, "why don't we have a little contest? Your samadhi power against my ki power. I think it would be interesting to see which proves stronger." Master Sengai looked up from his tea with eyes that held no trace of competitive spirit or defensive concern. "Certainly," he replied with gentle courtesy. "Feel free to demonstrate your ki power at any time." Shobayashi chuckled with sardonic confidence, already savoring his anticipated triumph. "I'm going to really teach you a lesson," he promised, his voice carrying the assured tone of someone who had never met his match. Retreating to the adjoining room to gather his full concentration, Shobayashi focused all his accumulated power and training into preparing for what he expected would be a devastating demonstration. Drawing upon years of disciplined practice, he unleashed a tremendous shout that seemed to shake the very foundations of the temple. The force of his cry was extraordinary, reverberating through the wooden structures and echoing across the temple grounds. Shobayashi was certain that such an explosive display of power would have sent the Zen master flying across the room, probably unconscious from the sheer spiritual force of the attack. "I must have knocked that Zen master right on his back," he thought triumphantly, as he prepared to survey the results of his demonstration. But when he peered into the room where Master Sengai had been sitting, he discovered the master calmly sipping his tea, completely undisturbed, as if nothing unusual had occurred. Bewildered but undeterred, Shobayashi gathered his energy for an even more powerful attempt. His second great shout surpassed the first in both volume and concentrated force, but Master Sengai remained completely unaffected, continuing his peaceful tea drinking with the same serene composure. Word of this remarkable contest reached the ears of the local lord, and consequently, Shobayashi's stipend was reduced by 50 koku of rice as punishment for his presumptuous behavior toward the respected master. When Master Sengai learned of this financial punishment, he was greatly concerned about Shobayashi's welfare and discreetly summoned him back to the temple. "Let's have another match," Sengai suggested with compassionate kindness. "This time, I'll teach you a surefire way to win." Rather than gloating over his victory or dismissing his challenger, the master began instructing Shobayashi in the meditation technique of counting breaths, patiently explaining the subtleties of awareness and concentration that formed the foundation of genuine spiritual power. Returning home, Shobayashi practiced this new technique with the same intensity he had once devoted to developing his key power. Night and day, he focused on his breathing, gradually discovering layers of experience he had never imagined. Slowly, his understanding deepened until, suddenly, he experienced a profound transformation. He became one with his breathing. There was no separate self observing the breath, no breath existing apart from his essential nature. From this place of complete unity he shouted, and the force of his cry seemed to fill not just heaven and earth, but the entire universe itself. "That's it!" he cried out spontaneously, understanding flooding through him like sunrise breaking over mountains. He rushed immediately to see Master Sengai, eager to share his realization. When he presented his newfound understanding to the master, Sengai was genuinely astonished. "Shobayashi, you've done it!" he exclaimed with joy. "You've knocked down not only me, but heaven and earth and all there is. I've lost the match." As the Buddha observed, the conquest of oneself is better than the conquest of all others. This teaching relates profoundly to the transformation from ego-driven power to authentic spiritual strength that emerges from unity rather than separation. Here we discover a profound distinction between force and true power. Shobayashi's initial demonstrations, impressive as they appeared, were based on the accumulated effort of a separate self trying to impact other separate objects. This approach, no matter how skillfully developed, operates within the realm of duality and competition. Master Sengai's apparent invulnerability wasn't the result of superior defensive techniques or stronger willpower. His equanimity arose from such deep realization of non-separation that there was no separate self to be knocked over, no fixed position to be disturbed. When someone truly understands their essential nature, external displays of power simply have no target to affect. This ancient wisdom illuminates our cultural obsession with power, dominance, and competitive advantage. We spend tremendous energy developing skills and abilities designed to give us influence over others, to make us impressive or intimidating, to establish our superiority in various fields. But this approach to power inevitably creates the very separation and conflict it seeks to overcome. Why do we assume that spiritual development should make us more powerful in conventional terms? This misconception stems from applying worldly success metrics to inner transformation. We imagine that meditation, spiritual practice, or wisdom should give us advantages over others rather than dissolving the competitive framework entirely. The master's response to Shobayashi's challenge demonstrates the compassionate nature of true wisdom. Rather than humiliating his challenger or using the incident to enhance his own reputation, Sengai was genuinely concerned when he learned of the man's punishment and took responsibility for helping him discover authentic power. This teaching reveals the difference between power over others and power from unity. Shobayashi's final shout, the one that filled heaven and earth, didn't emerge from a separate self trying to impact the world, but from the recognition that there is no fundamental separation between the shouter, the shout, and everything that exists. We can observe similar patterns in many areas of life where we mistake force for effectiveness. The parent who shouts at their children might temporarily gain compliance, but loses the deeper connection that creates lasting influence. The leader who relies on intimidation might control behavior, but fails to inspire genuine commitment. The speaker who tries to overwhelm audiences with impressive credentials might gain attention, but miss the authentic communication that truly moves people. Zen practice cultivates what might be called effortless effectiveness, the ability to accomplish what needs accomplishing without the strain and separation inherent in forceful approaches. When our actions arise from unity rather than division, they naturally carry more genuine power because they align with reality rather than fighting against it. Additionally, our minds tend to confuse dramatic displays with actual accomplishment. Shobayashi's initial shouts were certainly impressive, but they accomplished nothing meaningful beyond demonstrating his technical skill. His final realization, while perhaps appearing less spectacular, represented a fundamental transformation that changed his entire relationship to existence. This story also points us toward understanding the role of authentic teaching in spiritual development. Master Sengai didn't defeat Shobayashi and walk away. He recognized the sincere seeking beneath the competitive display and offered the precise guidance needed for genuine breakthrough. Tonight, as you consider areas where you might be trying to force outcomes or impress others with your capabilities, can you sense the difference between effort that arises from separation and action that flows from unity? What would it mean to let your effectiveness come from alignment rather than domination? The Buddha taught, "In separateness lies the world's great misery. In compassion lies the world's true strength." When we discover the authentic power that emerges from recognizing our fundamental interconnection, we find that we can indeed move heaven and earth, not through force, but through the irresistible influence of truth itself. As we continue our journey through the wisdom of Zen Buddhism, let us turn to a story about the difference between resistance and flow. This is the teaching of the old man and the waterfall. In a mountain village where a swift river carved its way through ancient rocks, an old Taoist sage often walked along the water's edge, observing the interplay between the flowing current and the solid stones that tried to redirect its path. The villagers knew him as a gentle, contemplative man who seemed to understand something profound about the natural world that others missed. One afternoon, as storm clouds gathered and rain began to fall, the river swelled with unusual force. The current grew violent and unpredictable, rushing toward a high waterfall that dropped into a rocky gorge below. Most people avoided the area during such conditions, knowing that anyone who fell into the rapids would face almost certain death against the jagged rocks at the bottom of the falls. The old man, however, had been caught by the sudden storm while walking along his usual path. As he tried to make his way back to safety, the muddy bank gave way beneath his feet. Before he could catch himself, he tumbled into the raging torrent and was immediately swept away by the powerful current. Villagers who witnessed his fall cried out in horror. They ran along the riverbank, helplessly watching as the old man was carried toward the waterfall by waters too violent and swift for any rescue attempt. They could only watch in anguish as he disappeared over the edge, plunging into the churning chaos below. Everyone assumed the worst. No one could survive such a fall, especially not an elderly man with limited strength. The villagers prepared themselves to search for his body downstream, once the waters calmed enough to make such a search possible. But to their amazement, as they hurried toward the base of the waterfall, they saw the old man emerging from the water far below, completely unharmed. He walked calmly to the shore, water streaming from his clothes, and sat down to rest as peacefully as if he had simply taken a refreshing swim on a pleasant day. The villagers rushed to him, unable to believe what they had witnessed. "How is this possible?" they asked in wonder. "How did you survive that terrible fall? The water was so violent, the rocks so dangerous. By all reason, you should have been killed." The old man smiled at their concern and amazement. He wrung water from his sleeves and considered their question carefully before answering. "I survived," he said simply, "because I accommodated myself to the water, not the water to me. When I felt myself falling, I did not fight against the current or try to force it to change direction. Without thinking, I allowed myself to be shaped by it. When the water wanted to go down, I went down. When it swirled, I swirled with it. Plunging into the whirlpool, I came out with the whirlpool. I became like the water itself, and this is how I survived." The villagers listened in silence, beginning to understand that they had witnessed something far more than a fortunate accident. They had seen a demonstration of a profound principle that the old man had spent years learning from his careful observation of the natural world. As the Buddha taught, nothing is permanent. Everything is subject to change. Being is always becoming. Here we discover the wisdom of working with life's currents, rather than exhausting ourselves in futile resistance to forces beyond our control. Why do we instinctively fight against difficult circumstances when flow and adaptation might serve us better? Zen Buddhism reveals that our ego mind believes it can control external conditions through force of will. But this approach often creates more suffering than the original difficulty. The old man's survival wasn't mere luck. It was the result of understanding something essential about the nature of existence itself. When we align ourselves with the natural flow of events, rather than demanding that life conform to our preferences, we often discover resources and possibilities that resistance makes invisible. Consider your own relationship with challenging circumstances. How much energy do you spend fighting against situations you cannot change? The old man's teaching suggests a different approach, not passive submission, but conscious adaptation that maintains our essential nature while flowing with changing conditions. This doesn't mean accepting harmful situations or abandoning our values. The old man didn't give up his desire to survive. He simply changed his strategy for survival. Instead of fighting the water's power, he used it. Instead of resisting its direction, he moved with it while maintaining his awareness and intention. In relationships, careers, and personal challenges, we often face similar choices. We can exhaust ourselves trying to force outcomes, control other people's behavior, or make external circumstances conform to our expectations. Or we can learn to work skillfully with what is actually present, finding creative ways to achieve our deeper purposes through accommodation rather than force. Zen Master Lao Tzu taught, "Water is fluid, soft, and yielding, but water will wear away rock, which cannot yield and is destroyed." The old man embodied this teaching, demonstrating that apparent weakness can be a source of tremendous strength when applied with wisdom. The Buddha said, "Hatred does not cease by hatred, but only by love. This is the eternal rule." This principle extends beyond hatred to all forms of resistance. Problems are rarely solved by fighting against them directly, but by understanding their nature and finding ways to work with the underlying forces involved. Look deeply at a current source of stress or conflict in your life. Where are you trying to force the water to change direction rather than learning to swim with it? What would it mean to accommodate yourself to the situation while maintaining your essential values and intentions? Tonight, as you encounter the inevitable currents of daily life, unexpected changes, difficult people, circumstances beyond your control, can you remember the old man's wisdom? Can you find ways to maintain your center while flowing with forces you cannot change, discovering that sometimes the most direct path to your goals is the one that appears to go around obstacles rather than through them? Buddha's wisdom reminds us, in the end, just three things matter: how well we have lived, how well we have loved, how well we have learned to let go. Learning to flow with life's currents is ultimately about letting go of our need to control everything while maintaining our ability to respond wisely to whatever arises. Like water, we can be both powerful and yielding, both persistent and adaptive, both strong and gentle. Now, let us explore a story about the difference between superficial understanding and lived wisdom. This is the tale of following the stream. In the heart of a vast wilderness, where towering pines stretched toward endless sky, two city dwellers found themselves completely lost. They had ventured into the high timber for what was supposed to be a simple day hike, but overconfidence and poor preparation had led them far from any familiar trail. For a day and a night, they wandered through the dense forest, their anxiety growing with each passing hour. The comfortable urban world they knew seemed impossibly distant. Every tree looked the same. Every path led to another confusing intersection, and their sense of direction had completely abandoned them. Just as panic was beginning to set in, they stumbled upon an old hermit sitting peacefully beside a small clearing. His weathered face spoke of years spent in solitude, and his calm presence offered immediate comfort to the desperate travelers. "How do we find our way back to civilization?" they asked urgently, their voices carrying the desperation of people who had exhausted their own resources. The hermit looked at them with kind eyes that seemed to see more than their immediate predicament. "I could tell you," he replied thoughtfully, "but you'd still get lost." The two men exchanged confused glances. This wasn't the straightforward directions they had hoped for. "What should we do?" they asked, their frustration evident. "Go with the flow," the hermit answered simply. "I beg your pardon," one of them responded, clearly expecting something more practical and specific. The hermit smiled and gestured toward a small stream that bubbled cheerfully through the clearing. "Go with the flow. You see that stream over there? Just follow it. Streams go into creeks, and creeks go into rivers, and rivers go through towns. Also, along the way you'll have water to drink and berries to eat." This practical advice made immediate sense to the lost travelers. Following water downstream was indeed a reliable way to find human settlements, and the stream would provide essential resources they needed for survival during their journey. But one of the men, perhaps having heard spiritual teachings before, asked a deeper question. "Is that what Zen people mean when they say, 'go with the flow'?" The hermit paused for a moment, considering this question with the same careful attention he had given their practical need for directions. "Yes and no," he replied enigmatically, and then continued along his way, leaving the two men to find their own understanding of his words. The Buddha once said, "If you understand, things are just as they are. If you do not understand, things are just as they are." This teaching points to the layered nature of wisdom that the hermit embodied in his response to the lost travelers. The deeper teaching here shows us how authentic spiritual guidance operates on multiple levels simultaneously. The hermit's advice was both completely practical and profoundly metaphorical. On the surface level, following the stream was simply good wilderness survival strategy. On On a deeper level, it represented the entire approach to living that Zen encourages. Why did the hermits say the travelers would still get lost, even if he gave them directions? This points to a fundamental truth about the difference between receiving information and developing wisdom. External directions can guide us temporarily, but they don't develop our inner capacity for navigation. Real wisdom involves learning to read the natural signs and flow with the underlying currents of life itself. Consider how this applies to our spiritual seeking. We often approach teachers and teachings looking for specific directions. Tell me exactly what to do to become enlightened. Give me the precise meditation technique that will solve my problems. But this approach, while understandable, misses the deeper point. True spiritual guidance doesn't provide a map, but teaches us how to read the territory. It doesn't give us someone else's answers, but helps us develop the capacity to find our own. Like the stream that naturally knows its way to the ocean, we each have an innate wisdom that can guide us if we learn to trust and follow it. The phrase "go with the flow" has become so common in popular culture that it's almost lost its meaning, often interpreted as passive resignation or lack of direction. But the hermit's yes and no response points to a more nuanced understanding. True flowing isn't about drifting aimlessly, but about aligning our efforts with the natural currents of wisdom and compassion. The stream represents the Tao, the natural way that underlies all existence. When we align ourselves with this deeper flow, our actions become effortless and effective. We stop pushing against reality and learn to work with the grain of existence rather than against it. But this requires developing a different kind of intelligence than our usual problem-solving mind. The travelers wanted explicit directions because that's how the rational mind works, through clear, step-by-step instructions. But the deeper intelligence the hermit was pointing toward operates more like intuition, sensing the right direction moment by moment rather than following a predetermined plan. This is why contemplative traditions emphasize present moment awareness. The stream doesn't need to know where the ocean is. It simply flows in the direction that feels natural right now. Similarly, when we develop moment-to-moment mindfulness, we can sense the appropriate response to each situation without needing to figure out the entire journey in advance. Tonight, as you navigate the complexities of your own life, can you sense the streams of natural wisdom flowing beneath the surface of your daily concerns? What would it mean to trust that deeper current while still attending responsibly to practical necessities? Buddha's wisdom reminds us, thousands of candles can be lighted from a single candle, and the life of the candle will not be shortened. The hermit's guidance was like lighting a candle in the travelers' minds, providing not just directions, but a way of approaching life that could serve them in countless future situations. Let us continue our journey with a story about the limits of intellectual understanding and the humility that true wisdom requires. This is the ultimate point. A learned Zen priest named Tai Gu had spent years studying sacred texts, mastering meditation techniques, and developing a reputation for spiritual insight. When the position of abbot became available at a respected temple, the community chose him, confident in his wisdom and abilities. Tai Gu accepted the role with pride, believing his years of preparation had equipped him for spiritual leadership. Soon after his appointment, a woman from the village approached the temple, her face etched with the deep grief of a mother who had lost her child. She bowed before the new abbot, her eyes filled with desperate hope. "Venerable Master," she said, her voice breaking, "I have heard of your great wisdom and compassion. My child has died, and my heart is shattered. Please, Tell me where my child has gone. I need to know. Where is my beloved child now? Taigu sat in silence, his mind racing through all the Buddhist teachings he had memorized about death, rebirth, and the nature of existence. He had studied the complex doctrines of different schools, could quote countless sutras about the bardos and the cycles of karma, and had meditated on the impermanence of all phenomena. Yet faced with this mother's raw anguish and simple question, he found himself utterly speechless. The philosophical concepts that had seemed so clear in scholarly discussion suddenly felt hollow and inadequate. The woman's grief was immediate and real, while his understanding remained theoretical and distant. He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came. How could he offer intellectual explanations to a heart torn apart by loss? The woman waited, her eyes searching his face for some comfort, some insight that might ease her unbearable pain. But Taigu remained silent, realizing with growing horror that despite all his study and supposed attainment, he had no authentic answer to offer her. Finally, the woman rose slowly, her shoulders shaking with silent sobs. She bowed once more and walked away, leaving Taigu alone with the weight of his inadequacy. Her footsteps echoed in the temple hall long after she had gone. That night, Taigu sat in deep contemplation, his certainty about his spiritual development crumbling. I thought I had attained realization, he whispered to himself. I believed I understood the deepest truths of existence. But this woman's simple question has revealed that I know nothing about the ultimate point. What use is being an abbot if I cannot offer genuine comfort to someone who is suffering? By morning, Taigu had made his decision. He removed his ceremonial robes, abandoned his prestigious position, and departed the temple to deepen his understanding of true compassion. As the Buddha observed, the greatest prayer is patience. What emerges from this story is a profound truth about the difference between intellectual knowledge and wisdom born from direct experience. Spiritual understanding that cannot meet human suffering with authentic presence serves no one, least of all ourselves. Why do we sometimes mistake scholarly knowledge for genuine wisdom? Zen Buddhism reveals several ways our minds create this confusion. We can become intoxicated by conceptual understanding, collecting spiritual ideas like trophies, while our hearts remain untouched by their deeper meaning. This intellectual accumulation gives us a false sense of advancement while leaving us unprepared for life's most challenging moments. We also develop what might be called premature certainty, the belief that because we can articulate spiritual truths, we have integrated them fully. Like a person who has read extensively about swimming but never entered the water, we might know all the theory while lacking practical skill when it matters most. Additionally, spiritual positions and titles can insulate us from the very experiences that would deepen our understanding. When people treat us as wise, we might begin to believe our own reputation rather than continuing to cultivate genuine insight. The abbot's role placed Taigu in a position where others expected him to have answers, but this expectation prevented him from acknowledging his actual limitations. Consider how this pattern appears in modern spiritual communities. Teachers might offer complex, philosophical explanations for suffering while lacking the emotional availability to simply sit with someone in pain. Practitioners could master advanced meditation techniques while remaining impatient with family members. Students might accumulate spiritual concepts while their basic capacity for kindness remains undeveloped. The Zen master Yunmen taught, If you walk, just walk. If you sit, just sit. But whatever you do, don't wobble. Taigu was wobbling between intellectual understanding and authentic realization. The grieving mother's question demanded presence, not philosophy. Compassion, not concepts. This doesn't diminish the value of spiritual study, but rather places it in proper perspective. Sacred texts and teachings serve as maps pointing toward direct experience, not substitutes for the journey itself. When we mistake the map for the territory, we become lost in abstraction while life's essential questions remain unanswered. The woman's question, "Where has my child gone?" cannot be answered adequately through doctrine or philosophy. It requires the kind of understanding that emerges only from confronting our own losses, sitting with our own grief, and developing the capacity to be present with suffering without needing to fix or explain it away. Taigu's decision to abandon his position demonstrates remarkable courage and authentic spiritual insight. Rather than defending his reputation or offering hollow comfort, he chose honesty about his limitations. This humility opened the door to genuine learning, while clinging to false certainty would have kept him trapped in spiritual pretense. The Buddha said, "Doubt everything, find your own light." True spiritual authority comes not from having all the answers, but from the willingness to remain present with life's deepest questions. Sometimes the most helpful response to someone's suffering is simply acknowledging that we don't know, but we're willing to sit with them in their pain. Tonight, as you reflect on your own spiritual understanding, can you distinguish between knowledge that lives in your head and wisdom that flows from your heart? Where might you be substituting concepts for genuine realization? What would it mean to approach life's ultimate questions with Taigu's hard-won humility? As the Buddha taught, it is better to conquer yourself than to win 1,000 battles. The conquest of false certainty opens the way to authentic wisdom. Let us explore a story that takes place in a tranquil temple nestled in the northern mountains of Japan, where autumn painted the world in brilliant shades of gold and crimson. This is the story of a garden and a Zen master. The crisp autumn air carries the sound of rustling leaves as a senior monk moves methodically through the temple courtyard. With careful precision, he gathers the fallen leaves beneath the ancient maple tree that has watched over this sacred space for centuries. Each sweep of his bamboo rake creates perfect lines in the gravel, and soon he has assembled a magnificent pile of leaves, their colors still vibrant despite their journey to the earth. The monk works with quiet satisfaction, placing the leaves carefully into woven baskets, his movements graceful and purposeful. From beyond the temple wall, another figure watches this scene unfold. A Zen master from a neighboring monastery observes the monk's diligent work, his weathered face thoughtful. When the senior monk notices his presence and waves proudly toward his immaculate garden, calling out cheerfully, "It is good, isn't it?" The Zen master simply nods and says, "Just about. Wait a moment, I'm coming over." The senior monk watches curiously as the Zen master enters through the wooden gate, walks directly to the ancient tree, and without ceremony gives its trunk a vigorous shake. Immediately, countless leaves cascade down like golden rain, covering the pristine garden once again in nature's beautiful disorder. The Zen master dusts off his hands and says simply, "Now it is good," before departing as quietly as he arrived. The Buddha once said, "Do not dwell in the past, do not dream of the future. Concentrate the mind on the present moment. This ancient wisdom illuminates a profound teaching about attachment to outcomes and the ego's need for completion. Why do we become so invested in finished results, in tidy conclusions, in maintaining the illusion of control over impermanence? Zen Buddhism reveals several patterns that trap us in outcome obsession. We often measure our worth by external achievements, rather than the quality of presence we bring to each action. The senior monk had moved from mindful raking to prideful display, from being present with the process to identifying with the product. Consider how often throughout your day you rush through activities simply to reach their completion. Washing dishes becomes about having clean dishes rather than the warm water on your hands. Exercise becomes about burning calories rather than feeling your body move. Meditation becomes about achieving peace rather than witnessing whatever arises. In each case, we sacrifice the richness of the present moment for an imagined future satisfaction. Zen Master Dogen taught, "You are perfect as you are, and you could use a little improvement." This seeming paradox points to the delicate balance between accepting what is while remaining open to continuous becoming. The garden was perfect in its autumn disorder, and it was also perfect in its temporary tidiness. Both states were fleeting expressions of natural flow. The deeper teaching here shows us that true spiritual practice lies not in achieving permanent states, but in developing the capacity to engage wholeheartedly with whatever work is before us. Whether gathering leaves or watching them fall, the quality of our attention matters more than the condition of our garden. When we cling to outcomes, we miss the sacred nature of process itself. This ancient wisdom challenges our productivity-obsessed culture that values completion over presence. What if the purpose of raking leaves isn't to have a tidy garden, but to practice wholehearted engagement with impermanence? What if the point of any spiritual practice isn't to achieve enlightenment, but to show up fully for this unrepeatable moment? Tonight, as you notice your attachment to having things finished, organized, or resolved, can you pause and appreciate the beauty of incompletion? Perhaps you'll discover that the most profound satisfaction comes not from achieving perfect results, but from offering perfect attention to whatever is arising now. As the Buddha taught, the mind is everything. What you think, you become. When we think we must control outcomes, we become anxious controllers. When we trust the wisdom of process, we become participants in life's deeper rhythms. Now, let us turn to a profound teaching about the artificial nature of our categories of pure and impure, and how spiritual understanding transcends conventional distinctions. This is the cremation ground soup. Master Ryokan had developed the habit of visiting his Dharma brother, Master Katsugen, a learned Zen teacher who maintained his own temple in a neighboring valley. These visits were occasions for mutual support and spiritual discussion, opportunities for two practitioners to share insights and deepen their understanding through dialogue with someone who truly comprehended the subtleties of the path. On one of these visits, as the midday meal approached, Master Ryokan made an unexpected announcement to his colleague. "I'm going to gather something we can use to make soup for lunch," he said, with the same matter-of-fact tone he might use for any ordinary domestic task. Taking a small gathering basket, the master set out to forage for wild vegetables that would enhance their simple meal. But instead of heading toward the mountain slopes or forest clearings, where wild plants typically grew in abundance, Master Ryokan walked deliberately toward the local cremation ground, the sacred space where the bodies of the deceased were burned according to traditional Buddhist funeral practices. This area was considered by most people to be ritually impure, a place where contact with death made everything contaminated and unsuitable for ordinary use. Untroubled by these conventional associations, Master Ryokan began carefully gathering wild celery that grew abundantly in the rich soil around the cremation site. The plants were healthy and vigorous, nourished by the same earth that received the ashes of the departed and transformed them into nutrients that supported new life. Returning home with his basket brimming with fresh wild greens, Master Ryokan set about preparing a simple miso soup using the celery he had gathered. He washed and chopped the vegetables with the same care he brought to all food preparation, treating these plants with the respect due to any gift from the earth that would nourish their bodies and support their practice. When the soup was ready, he offered it to Master Katsugen with the warm hospitality that characterized all his interactions with fellow practitioners. But his guest's response revealed the power of mental conditioning about purity and contamination that even advanced spiritual study hadn't completely dissolved. Master Katsugen felt deeply uncomfortable about consuming vegetables that had grown in soil associated with death and cremation. Though he feared showing disrespect to a senior practitioner by refusing the meal outright, he could barely bring himself to swallow even a single mouthful of what his mind categorized as contaminated food. Observing his colleague's obvious reluctance and the expression of distaste that he couldn't entirely conceal, Master Ryokan recognized a teaching opportunity that would address fundamental questions about the nature of purity and pollution that lay at the heart of spiritual understanding. "How is it," Master Ryokan asked with gentle but penetrating inquiry, "that you readily pronounce delicious vegetables that have been grown with manure, fertilized with animal waste and decomposed organic matter, but when it comes to wild celery growing naturally near a cremation ground, you find it objectionable and claim it's unclean?" This question struck at the heart of Katsugen's unconscious assumptions about what made food pure or impure. He suddenly recognized that his revulsion was based not on any actual difference in cleanliness or safety, but on cultural conditioning about which kinds of death and decomposition were acceptable to think about in relation to his food. The vegetables he ate daily were nourished by composted animal waste, decomposed plant matter, and all manner of organic material in various stages of decay. Yet these he consumed without thought or concern, because cultural conditioning had defined this type of fertilization as normal and acceptable. Only the association with human death created his psychological resistance. Master Katsugen experienced a moment of profound awakening as he recognized the arbitrary nature of his mental categories of pure and impure. The realization that his disgust was based on conditioning rather than reality dissolved his resistance, and he proceeded to consume several enthusiastic bowlfuls of the cremation ground soup, finding it genuinely nourishing and delicious. The Buddha once said, "All things arise from mind. Mind is their source and master." This ancient wisdom illuminates how our mental constructs about purity and contamination often have more power over our experience than the actual nature of things themselves. This story reveals something fundamental about how spiritual awakening involves seeing through the artificial categories that create unnecessary suffering and separation in our daily experience. Master Ryokan's question challenged not just Master Katsugun's food preferences, but the entire framework of dualistic thinking that divides experience into acceptable and unacceptable, pure and impure, sacred and profane. The cremation ground celery represents all the gifts that life offers us through processes of death, decay, and transformation that we typically prefer not to contemplate. Every meal we eat involves the death of plants or animals. Every breath we take depends on the decomposition of organic matter that creates the oxygen we need. Every moment of our existence is sustained by cycles of dying and renewal that we usually ignore. Why do we create such elaborate mental distinctions about which forms of death and decay are acceptable to acknowledge in relation to our sustenance? This tendency reflects our deep discomfort with the reality of impermanence and our attempt to maintain the illusion that we can somehow remain separate from the natural cycles of birth, death, and renewal that characterize all existence. Master Ryokan's comfortable relationship with the cremation ground demonstrates the kind of integration that comes from genuine spiritual understanding. Rather than seeing death as contamination, he recognized it as part of the same natural process that creates all life. The celery growing there was nourished by the same transformative forces that nourish all plant growth, the breakdown of organic matter that releases nutrients for new growth. This teaching illuminates our tendency to maintain comfortable ignorance about the sources of our daily sustenance. We prefer not to think about the slaughterhouses that provide our meat, the agricultural chemicals used to grow our vegetables, or the exploitation of workers involved in bringing food to our tables. Yet we're disturbed by vegetables that grew naturally in soil enriched by human ashes. The moment of Master Katsugun's enlightenment reveals how quickly our entire perception can shift when we recognize the arbitrary nature of our mental categories. What had seemed genuinely disgusting moments before suddenly appeared as exactly what it was: nourishing food grown in rich earth, no different in essence from any other vegetables. Zen practice cultivates what might be called non-discriminating awareness, the ability to see through our conditioned responses to the essential nature of phenomena that exists prior to our categories of good and bad, pure and impure, acceptable and unacceptable. This doesn't mean losing all discrimination, but rather holding our distinctions more lightly. This story also points us toward understanding how much of our psychological suffering comes from maintaining artificial separations that don't reflect the actual nature of reality. When we can see the fundamental interconnectedness that includes death as an essential part of life, many of our fears and aversions naturally dissolve. We can observe similar patterns of arbitrary categorization in many areas of life where our conditioning creates unnecessary limitations and suffering. The assumptions about which types of work are honorable versus degrading, which kinds of people are worthy of respect versus dismissal, which forms of spiritual practice are pure versus contaminated. Additionally, our minds tend to assume that spiritual development should lead us away from anything associated with death, decay, or impermanence. But Master Ryokan's story suggests that true wisdom involves embracing the full spectrum of natural processes, rather than trying to maintain artificial purity through avoidance and denial. The transformation of Master Katsugen's relationship to the soup, from barely able to swallow it to enthusiastically consuming multiple bowls, demonstrates how our enjoyment of life can expand dramatically when we release unnecessary mental restrictions based on cultural conditioning rather than actual discernment. Tonight, as you consider your own categories of pure and impure, acceptable and unacceptable, can you identify areas where cultural conditioning might be creating artificial limitations that separate you from the fullness of life's offerings? What would it mean to question these distinctions with the same penetrating inquiry that Master Ryokan brought to the cremation ground celery? As the Buddha taught, form is emptiness, emptiness is form. When we understand that the categories we impose on experience exist in our minds rather than as inherent properties of phenomena themselves, we discover the freedom to engage with life more directly and completely, finding nourishment and wisdom in places we had previously avoided through conditioned aversion. Our next story reveals a profound teaching about the nature of emptiness and the surprising places where we discover truth. This is the story of grasping what cannot be held. In a quiet monastery garden where cherry blossoms drifted gently on the morning breeze, Master Sekyo sat with one of his most earnest students. The young monk had been studying Buddhist philosophy for several years, filling his mind with concepts about the nature of reality, the illusion of the self, and the teaching of emptiness that seems so central to the Buddha's wisdom. He could recite passages about shunyata, discuss the philosophical implications of non-being, and engage in lengthy debates about the relationship between form and void. But for all his intellectual understanding, something felt missing. The words remained just words, concepts floating in his mind without the direct experience that would make them real. He approached his teacher that morning with a question that had been troubling him for months. "Master," the young monk said, bowing respectfully, "I have studied the teaching of emptiness extensively. I understand that all phenomena arise and pass away, that nothing has permanent, independent existence. But I feel like I'm only grasping concepts. Can you help me get hold of emptiness itself?" Sekyo looked at his student with knowing eyes. He had seen this struggle many times before, the gap between intellectual understanding and direct realization, the frustration of trying to grasp with the mind what can only be known through experience. "Show me how you would get hold of emptiness," the master said simply. The monk thought for a moment, then cupped his hands in the air as if he were trying to capture something invisible. He held his hands carefully as though cradling a soap bubble that might burst at any moment. His face was earnest and concentrated, his entire being focused on this attempt to demonstrate his understanding of a teaching about the very nature of nothingness. "There," he said, holding his cupped hands very still. "I'm trying to hold emptiness itself." Sekyo looked at the student's empty hands and shook his head gently. "That's not very good," he said with a slight smile. "You haven't got anything in there at all. You're just holding air and calling it something special." The monk's face fell. He had been so certain that his gesture captured something meaningful about the teaching. "Well, master," he said, his voice tinged with disappointment and confusion, "please show me a better way. How does one truly get hold of emptiness?" Without warning, Master Sekyo reached out and grabbed the monk's nose, giving it a sharp, firm yank. "Ouch!" the monk yelled, his hands flying to his face, his eyes watering from the sudden, unexpected pain. "Master, that hurt me!" Sekyo released his grip and smiled broadly. "Now that," he said with satisfaction, "is how you get hold of emptiness." The monk stood there, rubbing his nose, completely bewildered. His nose throbbed with very real, very unempty pain. How could this physical sensation, this undeniable presence of discomfort, have anything to do with emptiness? It seemed like the opposite of everything he had been studying. But as the initial shock wore off, something began to shift in his understanding. The pain in his nose was absolutely real, yet it was also completely impermanent, already beginning to fade. It had arisen from nowhere, would disappear completely, and left no permanent mark on reality. It was both utterly present and completely insubstantial. More importantly, in the moment of that sharp sensation, all his conceptual thinking about emptiness had vanished entirely. There had been no philosophical analysis, no abstract understanding, just direct, immediate experience. The gap between the one experiencing and the thing experienced had dissolved in the simple reality of ouch. As the Buddha taught, form is emptiness. Emptiness is form. Here we discover that emptiness is not the absence of experience, but the very nature of all experience. Everything arises, exists for a moment, and passes away, leaving no permanent trace while being completely real in its moment of appearing. Why do we struggle so hard to understand emptiness conceptually when it's the very fabric of every moment? Zen Buddhism points to our habit of trying to grasp reality with our thinking minds rather than experiencing it directly. We turn the most immediate truths into abstract philosophies, then wonder why they feel distant and theoretical. The monk's mistake was common and understandable. He was trying to hold emptiness as if it were a thing, an object that could be captured and possessed. But emptiness isn't an object. It's the very condition that allows all objects to appear and disappear. It's not something we can grasp. It's what makes grasping possible. Consider your own experience right now. The thoughts arising in your mind. Where do they come from? Where do they go when they fade? The sensations in your body, the sounds around you, even your sense of being someone who is reading these words. All of it is appearing and disappearing in the space of awareness, like clouds in an empty sky. This emptiness isn't blank nothingness. It's alive, responsive, creative, the very capacity for experience itself. When Sekio yanked his student's nose, he wasn't demonstrating the absence of sensation, but the miraculous way sensation appears from nowhere, exists vividly, and dissolves back into nowhere, all within the spacious emptiness of awareness. Zen Master Huang Po taught, "The foolish reject what they see, not what they think. The wise reject what they think, not what they see." The monk was rejecting his direct experience in favor of his concepts about experience. The master's intervention brought him back to the immediacy of seeing, feeling, and knowing without the filter of philosophical analysis. In our daily lives, we constantly encounter this same teaching. The anger that seems so solid and permanent when we're caught in it. Where does it go when it naturally subsides? The worry that feels so important and real. What is its actual substance when we look closely? Even our sense of being a solid, separate self, isn't it actually more like a flowing process? A river that appears to be the same while constantly changing. The Buddha said, "All conditioned things are impermanent. Work out your salvation with diligence." This isn't a philosophical statement, but a direct pointing to what's happening right now. Everything we experience is empty, in the sense that it has no permanent, independent existence, yet it's all perfectly real as it appears. Tonight, as you notice thoughts, sensations, and experiences arising and passing in your awareness, can you sense the emptiness that Sekio was pointing to? Not as an abstract concept, but as the very space in which your life is unfolding. Can you feel how this emptiness is not separate from the fullness of your experience, but is its very nature. Buddha's wisdom reminds us, in the sky, there is no distinction of east and west. People create distinctions out of their own minds and then believe them to be true. The emptiness of all phenomena isn't something we need to achieve or understand. It's what we are, what everything is right now. We just need to stop trying to grasp it and let ourselves be grasped by it instead. Let us continue our journey with a story about the unexpected wisdom found in laughter and the suffering we create through taking ourselves too seriously. This is the tale of the monk who discovered his true teacher. In a remote mountain monastery in ancient China, there lived a young monk who approached his spiritual practice with tremendous intensity. Every morning before dawn, he would rise for meditation, sitting in perfect posture for hours without moving. He studied the Buddhist texts with scholarly precision, memorizing sutras and debating philosophical points with fierce concentration. His fellow monks often remarked on his seriousness and dedication to the Dharma. One crisp autumn morning, while studying a particularly complex passage about the nature of emptiness, the young monk encountered something that completely baffled him. The text seemed to contradict everything he thought he understood about Buddhist philosophy. The words appeared clear enough individually, but their meaning together seemed to dissolve into paradox the moment he thought he grasped it. Determined to understand, he carefully marked the passage and made his way to the master's quarters. The old teacher sat in his simple room, sunlight streaming through paper windows, creating patterns of light and shadow on the wooden floor. "Venerable master," the monk said, bowing deeply, "I have encountered a teaching that I cannot comprehend. Could you please illuminate its meaning for me?" He recited the passage with careful precision, explaining his confusion and the various interpretations he had considered. The master listened attentively, nodding occasionally, his expression thoughtful and engaged. When the young monk finished his earnest explanation, something unexpected happened. The master's face suddenly broke into a broad smile, then quiet chuckling, and finally erupted into hearty, uncontrollable laughter. His whole body shook with mirth, tears streaming down his weathered cheeks. The monk stood frozen, completely bewildered. This was not the response he had anticipated. Where he expected profound wisdom and careful explanation, he found only laughter. The master's amusement seemed to fill the entire room, echoing off the walls and growing even more intense. Without offering any explanation, the master stood up, still laughing, and walked out of the room, leaving the young monk alone with his confusion and growing distress. For the next 3 days, the monk could think of nothing else. The master's inexplicable laughter haunted him constantly. He barely touched his meals, his meditation was scattered and unfocused, and sleep came only in brief, restless intervals. The question consumed him entirely. Why had his sincere spiritual inquiry been met with such puzzling amusement? Other monks noticed his distressed state, but his responses to their concerns were vague and troubled. He felt humiliated, confused, and increasingly agitated. Had the master been mocking his understanding? Was his question somehow foolish? Did his years of dedicated practice mean nothing? Finally, unable to bear the torment any longer, he returned to the master's room. This time, he didn't bow or recite passages. Instead, he spoke directly from his heart. "Master, for 3 days I have been deeply disturbed by your reaction to my question. I cannot eat, sleep, or meditate properly. Please tell me, why did you laugh at my sincere seeking? Have I done something wrong?" The master's expression became gentle, and compassionate. He gestured for the young monk to sit beside him, then spoke with quiet clarity. "Monk, do you know what your problem is?" the master asked kindly. "Your problem is that you are worse than a clown." The words hit the young monk like a physical blow. His eyes widened in shock and dismay. "Venerable sir, how can you say such a thing? How can I be worse than a clown? I have dedicated my life to spiritual practice, to understanding the Buddha's teachings. I have sacrificed worldly pleasures and pursued wisdom with complete sincerity. How can you compare me to a mere entertainer?" The master smiled warmly and explained, "A clown's greatest joy comes from making people laugh. When others laugh, the clown feels fulfilled and happy. His entire purpose is to bring lightness and joy to the world. But you, when another person laughs, you feel disturbed, upset, and tormented. Tell me, are you not worse than a clown?" At these words, understanding dawned like sunrise breaking through clouds. The young monk saw immediately how his attachment to being taken seriously had created his suffering. He had been so invested in his image as a dedicated practitioner that he couldn't receive the master's joy. The laughter hadn't been mockery. It had been pure delight at the beauty of the Dharma expressing itself through paradox. In that moment of recognition, the monk began to laugh. First quietly, then with growing freedom and joy. He laughed at his own seriousness, at his attachment to understanding, at the beautiful absurdity of seeking enlightenment so grimly. His laughter joined with the master's from 3 days earlier, and in that shared joy, understanding flowered naturally. As the Buddha observed, if you light a lamp for somebody, it will also brighten your path. The heart of this lesson lies in recognizing how our reactions to others reveal the state of our own minds. Why do we become disturbed when others express joy in ways we don't understand? Zen Buddhism points to several patterns that create this type of suffering. First is our attachment to being understood and validated. The young monk's disturbance stemmed not from the master's laughter itself, but from his need for his question to be received with the seriousness he felt it deserved. Second is our identification with our spiritual image. When we become attached to being seen as sincere seekers, dedicated practitioners, or wise students, we lose the spontaneity and openness that allows genuine learning. The monk's investment in his identity as a serious practitioner made him unable to receive the teaching that was being offered through laughter. Third is our limited understanding of how wisdom can be transmitted. We expect spiritual teaching to arrive in familiar forms, solemn explanations, careful analysis, traditional formats. But enlightenment often comes through unexpected doorways. A master's laughter, a child's innocent question, the sound of a bell, or a moment of complete ordinariness. Consider how often we miss teachings because they don't match our expectations. Perhaps someone's casual comment contains exactly the insight we need, but we dismiss it because the person seems less knowledgeable than us. Maybe life presents us with lessons through situations we find annoying or people we consider frivolous. Zen teacher Suzuki Roshi said, "In the beginner's mind, there are many possibilities, but in the expert's mind, there are few." The young monk's expertise had become a barrier to learning. His certainty about how spiritual teaching should look prevented him from receiving the profound lesson being offered through unexpected laughter. The story points us toward a fundamental question. Are we seeking understanding, or are we seeking to be understood? Are we open to wisdom arriving in any form, or do we require it to validate our preconceptions. The Master's laughter was a teaching about the joy inherent in the Dharma itself, the playful, spontaneous, beyond logic nature of awakened understanding. Tonight, as you encounter responses from others that don't match your expectations, can you remember the monk's revelation? Perhaps someone's laughter when you expected seriousness, their casualness when you hoped for depth, or their joy when you felt the situation called for gravity might contain teachings you haven't yet recognized. Buddha spoke of this when he said, "Thousands of candles can be lighted from a single candle, and the life of the candle will not be shortened. Happiness never decreases by being shared." The Master's laughter was not diminishing the Dharma, but celebrating its inexhaustible joy, a joy the monk discovered he could share rather than resist. Tonight, as we bring our shared journey to a gentle close, can you feel how the constant stream of thoughts has naturally begun to quiet? Can you sense that the mental stillness you've experienced isn't something you had to force or chase, but something that emerged naturally as you simply listened and allowed? The Buddha taught us, the whole secret of existence is to have no fear. Never fear what will become of you, depend on no one. Only the moment you reject all help are you freed. Reflecting on this wisdom, notice how tonight you've discovered that freedom from endless thinking doesn't require struggle or effort, but comes from learning to observe your mind with gentle understanding. Throughout our time together, each story has revealed the same liberating truth, that mental peace isn't about stopping thoughts entirely, but about changing your relationship with them completely. Even as thoughts continue to arise, you've experienced something profound, the space between thoughts, the quiet awareness that notices thinking without getting caught in it. This understanding is now part of you, ready to support you whenever the mind becomes restless or overwhelmed. The ancient wisdom you've absorbed tonight has shown you that true rest comes not from emptying the mind, but from no longer being controlled by its constant activity. Consider how these 3 hours have demonstrated something remarkable, that you already possess everything needed for deep peace and understanding. In the quiet moments that follow, allow yourself to recognize how your breathing has deepened, how your body has naturally relaxed, and how your awareness has expanded beyond the narrow focus of worried thinking. These teachings remind us that mental freedom isn't found in complicated techniques or distant practices. It lives in the simple recognition that you are not your thoughts. You are the awareness that observes them. Tonight, you've experienced this truth directly, discovering the profound rest that comes when we stop fighting our minds and start understanding them instead. As you drift towards sleep, carry with you not just the stories themselves, but the deep knowing they've awakened. That peace isn't something to achieve, but something to remember. This understanding will remain with you, offering guidance and comfort whenever life feels overwhelming or your thoughts seem out of control. May this wisdom continue to unfold naturally in your daily experience, bringing clarity to confusion and calm to chaos. Sleep well, and thank you for joining us on this journey at Sleepy Monk.